Malcolm Vane smiled when he said it. That was the part Zuri Ellington could never forget. Not the words themselves, though. The words were bad enough, but the smile. Calm, patient. The smile of a man who had rehearsed this moment and found it satisfying. "You know I love you," he said, setting down his fork like they were discussing the weather. "But you have to understand how this looks. My colleagues' wives are going to be there, the photographers, and you showing up in that dress." He tilted his head. "It sends a message, Zuri. It tells people I don't have standards." She was 31 years old, sitting at a dinner table in her own apartment, wearing a dress she'd bought specifically for his company gala, and the man she was supposed to marry in 4 months had just told her that her body was an embarrassment. He kept smiling, she kept breathing, and somewhere in the space between his words and her silence, something that had been quietly cracking inside Zuri Ellington finally broke completely. If you've ever loved someone who made you feel like you were too much and not enough at the exact same time, stay with me. Because this story is about what happens when a woman who was told to become smaller walks into the life of a man who was told he was too large for anyone to love. And what happens when two people who've been broken in completely different ways discover that neither of them needed fixing. Subscribe to the channel right now, hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. Because I promise you, what happens next between Zuri Ellington and Seo Kang-hyun is the kind of story you are going to want to watch from the very beginning. Zuri Ellington drove to the Seo estate. She ate a gas station honey bun in the parking lot of a Shell station on I-90 and seriously considered turning around. Not because she was afraid. She'd stopped being afraid of Seo Kang-hyun approximately 6 minutes into researching him, when she found a photograph of him crouching in front of a demolished community center in Koreatown, writing a personal check to the director while his security team stood behind him, looking vaguely bored. A man who used kidnapped children as leverage didn't show up to ruined community centers with a checkbook. A man who enjoyed cruelty didn't look tired and quietly sorry in that photograph. He looked like a person carrying something heavy. Zuri understood people who carried things. What she was afraid of, and she would not have admitted this to anyone, not her best friend Camille, not her mother, definitely not the lawyer who'd processed the formal arrangement documents between the Ellington and Seo families, was herself. Specifically her tendency to walk into glass doors, knock beverages off surfaces with her elbow, and most recently, destroy an entire display of wine glasses at a charity auction by catching her heel on a table runner and lurching sideways like a ship taking on water. She was a plus-size black woman with wide hips, a generous chest, arms she'd spent years trying to angle away from cameras, and a center of gravity that seemed to operate according to its own private physics. She was also 32 years old, recently escaped from a 4-year relationship that had methodically taught her that those facts were problems to be managed. And she was now apparently sitting outside a Korean mafia boss's private estate because his grandmother had called her mother on a Tuesday and said, with extraordinary confidence, that this arrangement would benefit everyone involved. Zuri had said absolutely not. Her mother had said think about it. Warren Seo had called back on Thursday and simply said, "I've seen your photograph. My grandson needs a woman who isn't afraid of him." "I believe you are not afraid of much," Zuri had said. "I broke 3 toes last year by walking into a doorframe." There had been a long pause. Then Hwaran had said, "Perfect. He will have something to catch." That was how Zuri Ellington ended up finishing a honey bun in a gas station parking lot, licking her fingers, checking her lipstick in the rearview mirror, and driving the remaining 4 miles to the Seo estate. Because she was $22,000 in student loan debt. Her lease was up in 6 weeks. She was apparently willing to spend 90 days in a billionaire crime lord's mansion if it meant having time to figure out what came next. The arrangement was simple enough on paper. 90 days. Zuri would live at the estate. She and Seo Kang-hyun would determine whether they were compatible. At the end, they could choose marriage or walk away. No penalties, no pressure. She'd have her own room, her own schedule, access to his estate's car fleet and household accounts for personal expenses, and freedom to leave at any time if she felt unsafe. Hwaran had delivered this information like a hotel concierge, describing amenities. Zuri had spent a week trying to find the catch. She never found one. What she found instead, when she finally pulled through the estate's iron gates and handed her ID to the security guard, a compact, watchful Korean man in his mid-30s who introduced himself as Yoon Jae-min and apparently served as Kang-hyun's lieutenant, chief of security, and general right hand, was a property that looked like someone had taken an enormous amount of money and made almost no effort to appear warm. The architecture was beautiful. The grounds were immaculate. The flowers were professionally arranged by someone who understood beauty in the abstract, but perhaps never walked through the garden just to walk. Nothing in the Seo estate looked lived in. It looked managed. She was still noticing this when Jaemin opened the front door for her, and she walked into the marble foyer and caught her heel on the edge of an antique rug worth more than her car and pitched forward with the kind of committed, full-body momentum that left absolutely no room for dignity. Her hand shot out, found fabric, grabbed it. The man attached to the fabric, because there was, unfortunately, a man attached to it, was pulled toward her as she swayed, and for one suspended, horrifying second, Zuri Ellington had both fists knotted in the lapels of Seo Kang-hyun's jacket, and her forehead approximately 3 inches from his chin, and the entire marble foyer had gone so completely silent that she could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. She did not fall. She also did not immediately let go of his jacket. Her brain was still processing the fact that the man she was clutching was approximately 6 feet 4 inches of solid Korean organized crime, built like someone had taken a professional linebacker and added 10 years of absolute authority, with a jaw like a door hinge, and eyes that were currently, she noticed with some alarm, entirely focused on her face instead of the insult she had just delivered to his clothing. Zuri said, "I'm so sorry." Seo Kang-hyun said nothing. She released his jacket, straightened, smoothed down her dress with hands that were not quite steady, and told herself very firmly that she had not just attempted to accidentally hang herself on the collar of the man she was potentially going to marry. "I do this," she said, "for what it's worth. It's not nerves. Well, it's also nerves, but mostly I just do this." Kang-hyun was still watching her, not with anger, not with the faint contemptuous amusement she'd half expected. He was watching her, the way someone watches a situation they haven't encountered before and have not yet decided how to categorize. "Do you want to try again?" he said. "Or should we call this the introduction?" His voice was low, measured, accented, in a way that suggested English was not his first language, but he'd spent a long time learning to use it precisely. It was the voice of a man who spoke carefully, because he knew his words carried weight. Zuri looked at him for a moment. "Am I allowed 3 falls before you send me home?" Something crossed his face. It moved too quickly for her to read it. But it was there. "Jaemin," he said, without looking away from her, "please have Miss Ellington's bags brought to the East Suite." That was how 90 days began. The East Suite turned out to be a bedroom, roughly the size of Zuri's entire previous apartment, with windows that faced a private garden and a bathroom containing a soaking tub she suspected had never actually been used. On the dresser, she found a single envelope with her name written on it in blocky, angular handwriting. Inside was a room key. Below it, a note that said the only other copy has been destroyed. "Nobody enters this room without your permission. Nobody." SKH Zuri read it twice. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed and held the note for a moment, thinking about the fact that Malcolm Vane had once entered her apartment while she was at work, gone through her closet, and removed 3 dresses he felt were sending the wrong message. He'd done it quietly, without discussion, and when she'd noticed and confronted him, he'd looked genuinely confused about why she was upset. The supposedly dangerous Korean mafia boss had just handed her the only key to her room and told her, in writing, that nobody would enter without her permission. She folded the note and put it in her wallet, which was not something she planned to analyze further. Dinner that first evening was quiet, which Zuri had expected, and also oddly comfortable, which she hadn't. Hwaran Seo turned out to be a small man in her mid-70s with white hair pinned back with a lacquer comb hands covered in jade rings, and the focused energy of a woman who had spent decades making very precise decisions and was not about to stop now. Sounding. She spoke English with authority, ate deliberately, and spent approximately half of dinner watching Zuri with the careful attention of someone evaluating a piece of architecture. Kang-hyun sat at the head of the table and said perhaps 15 sentences over the course of an hour. He wasn't rude, he wasn't cold exactly. He was present in the way a person is present when they've been taught that taking up too much conversational space is a form of aggression contained, careful, only speaking when he had something specific to say. Zuri, by contrast, talked enough for both of them by her own estimate and approximately half a conversation by anyone else's. She told Hwaran about her graduate degree in non-profit management. She told Kang-hyun because he asked two direct questions and seemed to mean both of them, about her work running volunteer coordination for a literacy program on the South Side. She told nobody about Malcolm because there are things you don't deploy on the first night, even when they're true, and she wasn't there to audition her damage. What she noticed in the spaces between talking was that Kang-hyun ate neatly and wasn't showy about it, that he refilled Hwaran's water glass before she asked, that when Jaemin appeared in the doorway to quietly relay something, Kang-hyun excused himself from the table before he responded, so neither Hwaran nor Zuri would have to sit through business they weren't part of. Small things. She collected them the way you collect evidence, without deciding yet what you're building a case for. The estate was enormous in a way that took several days to fully understand. There were wings Zuri hadn't seen, gardens she hadn't walked. A library she discovered on day 3. When she followed the sound of a stuck window she could hear from the hallway, and found herself in a room containing floor-to-ceiling shelves and a reading chair positioned beside a window that had apparently been painted shut sometime in the previous decade. She got it open with a butter knife and her left elbow, which cost her a small bruise and felt entirely worth it. She had been sitting in that chair reading for about 40 minutes when she realized someone had quietly left a cup of tea on the table beside her. She hadn't heard anyone come in. She looked at the door. Empty. She looked at the tea, still steaming. She drank it. It was exactly the kind she preferred, which she had mentioned to no one since arriving at the estate, and which she had bought herself every morning for 4 years, at the same coffee shop near her old apartment, and which she checked the brand on the bag, left discreetly on the shelf. Kang-hyun's kitchen had apparently stocked, at some point between her arrival and this moment. Zuri put the tea bag down. She sat with that for a while. What the rumors about Seo Kang-hyun said was this, that he was violent by nature and enjoyed being feared, that his size made him a weapon he'd never learned to put down, that women left him because what they encountered when the controlled surface fell away was something they weren't built to handle. The rumors were specific in the way rumors always are. When they've been polished by repetition, they had weight and texture, and they came from enough different directions that they had to contain at least some truth. What Zuri observed in the first 2 weeks at the estate was something else entirely. She watched him spend 45 careful minutes repairing a bracelet that belonged to Hwaran, his hands big enough that she'd seen him palm a dinner plate like most people, palm a tennis ball, moving with the kind of unhurried precision that meant he'd done it before, and knew the bracelet mattered to the woman who wore it. She watched him carry an estate groundskeeper, a man named Park, who'd wrenched his knee badly on the uneven garden path, from the garden to the infirmary, not because there was no one else available, but because it was faster. And because when Park winced in embarrassment at needing to be carried, Kang-hyun said something brief in Korean that made Park laugh, despite himself, and stop being embarrassed. She watched him with Jaemin's daughter. This one was what got her. Jaemin brought his daughter to the estate one afternoon, because the girls' school was closed and the usual sitter was unavailable. She was 6, named Sua, and she had apparently brought a gift, a drawing she'd made at school, intended specifically for Uncle Hyun, which Jaemin relayed to Kang-hyun with the expression of a man who was both proud of his child and slightly uncertain how this was going to land. Sua marched across the estate's main with the drawing clutched in both hands, absolutely certain of her welcome, and presented it to Seo Kang-hyun, one of Chicago's most feared organized crime figures, who immediately crouched to her eye level. With the physical ease of a man used to making himself smaller, studied the drawing with complete seriousness and said, "This is excellent." Sua told him it was a picture of him. Zuri, watching from the hallway, looked at the drawing. It appeared to be a large brown rectangle with a circle on top, surrounded by what might have been people, or might have been trees. "I can see that," Kang-hyun said, which was either a lie or a gift, depending on how you looked at it. He framed the picture. Zuri found it hung in his office the next morning, next to what appeared to be a signed commercial real estate contract worth a number she didn't want to read too closely. She stood in his office doorway for a long moment, looking at that drawing. Then she went to find breakfast and tried to recalibrate everything she thought she'd understood about dangerous men. The conversation about the pastries happened on day 11. Zuri had noticed, beginning on day 4, that every morning when she came downstairs there was a specific pastry waiting on the kitchen island beside the coffee. Not generic bakery, selections, the kind of careful variety that suggested someone figuring out what a person actually likes. On day 4 it was a butter croissant. Day 6, a ham and cheese one. Day 8, a cinnamon roll from a specific bakery whose bag she recognized because she'd ordered from their online shop twice in the previous year. On day 11, she walked into the kitchen and found Kang-hyun already there, standing at the counter with a coffee cup, and on the island was a bag from a patisserie in Andersonville that she had visited exactly once, for her friend Camille's birthday, and which she had mentioned to no one. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. "That's from Andersonville," she said. Kang-hyun looked at his coffee. "There are multiple bakeries in Andersonville. The address on the bag is the one on Clark Street. There's only one patisserie on that block. The one I told Camille I thought had the best chocolate croissant in the city. Jaemin's wife has a preference for that location. Jaemin's wife lives in Oak Park." He said nothing. Zuri pulled the bag toward her, opened it, and found exactly what she'd told Camille she thought was the best chocolate croissant in Chicago. She took a bite. It was still warm, which meant someone had made a specific early morning trip to Andersonville to have it warm by the time she came downstairs. She looked at him again. Kang-hyun was studying the far wall, with the dedication of a man who has found it very architecturally interesting. "Thank you," Zuri said. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Okay." She ate another bite. "Jaemin's wife has excellent taste." She thought she heard something that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly suppressed. The charity gala happened in week 3, and it was where Zuri first understood what she was actually dealing with. The event was a fundraiser for a children's hospital expansion, held at a downtown hotel, and the guest list was the particular combination of old Chicago money and new Chicago power that made for interesting people watching and exhausting small talk. Zuri wore a deep red dress with a fitted waist and a skirt that moved when she walked, and she felt good in it until she stepped into the ballroom and felt the specific shift in the air that happens when you are a visibly fat, black woman walking into a room full of thin people in expensive clothes who are, on some level, mentally noting your existence and filing it somewhere it doesn't belong. She'd spent years trying not to notice that shift. Spent years pretending she didn't feel it. Malcolm had made it worse, not better, because his solution had been for her to take up less space, eat less, wear things that hid more, stand at angles, as though the room's discomfort was her responsibility to manage. She was moving automatically toward the edges of the room when Kang-hyun appeared at her side. He didn't say anything about where she was heading. He didn't point it out or ask. He simply put his hand at the small of her back, a light touch, a question more than a directive, and steered them both toward the center of the room, toward the photographers and the other guests, and all the space she had been quietly trying to avoid. Zuri went with him, because she was surprised enough that she moved before she thought. Later in the evening, a woman Zuri didn't know elegant 50s, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never had to try very hard at anything approached them near the bar. She spoke to Kang-hyun first, the easy greeting of a long acquaintance, then turned to Zuri with a smile that contained a specific quality Zuri had learned to identify on sight. "You look wonderful," the woman said. "It's so refreshing to see a woman comfortable enough to wear something so fitted." At any size, she touched Zuri's arm briefly. "Good for you." It was delivered perfectly. Sincere voice, warm eyes, everything arranged to look like a compliment while landing exactly like a needle. Zuri felt it hit. She had a response. Ready years of practice had given her a small arsenal of responses, but before she could choose one, she felt Kang-hyun's hand shift from the small of her back to her side. He didn't squeeze, he didn't tense. He turned toward her, not toward the woman, and said, with an unhurried certainty of someone closing a door, "There's someone I'd like to introduce you to. Will you excuse us?" He said it to Zuri, not to the woman. They walked away together. 3 steps. 4. The woman's expression fading behind them. Zuri said, "I had a response." "I know," Kang-hyun said. "You didn't have to do that. I know that too." They found a quiet corner near the windows. Kang-hyun handed her a glass of water and stood beside her in a silence that didn't require anything from her, and Zuri pressed the cool glass to her palm and thought about the fact that Malcolm, in 4 years, had never once moved her away from cruelty. He had, on 3 separate occasions, agreed with it. She looked at the profile of the man beside her. Jaw set, eyes moving carefully around the room, enormous and controlled, and apparently operating on a private code she was only beginning to read. She was starting to understand why 6 women leaving hadn't been the simple story everyone assumed. The photograph in the study was not something Zuri found on purpose. She'd gotten lost, genuinely lost, which she accepted about herself without drama at this point, looking for the library. On night 17, missed a turn, and pushed open a door that she assumed was a hallway, only to find herself standing in a room that was clearly private, in the specific way rooms are private when they belong to someone who has no expectation of being intruded upon. The room was a study. Dark wood, a desk covered in the organized chaos of someone who worked in here regularly, shelves along 2 walls, with a combination of books and files and objects she didn't have time to identify because she had noticed, on the surface of the desk, a wooden box sitting open with its lid propped back. Inside the box were velvet pouches, 6 of them, and she knew with a certainty that hit her before she'd finished the thought what was inside each one. She picked up the nearest pouch, loosened the drawstring, tipped the contents into her palm. It was a ring, an engagement ring. A beautiful 1 platinum setting, oval stone, clearly chosen with care by someone who knew what they were doing. She put it back, picked up the next one. Different. Rose gold, cushion cut, equally considered. She had 4 of them in her palm when she heard the door. She turned around. Kang-hyun stood in the doorway. Zuri looked at the rings in her hand, looked at him, set them carefully back in the box. She expected anger. She had, objectively, walked into his private study and was standing over his personal belongings with both hands in them. What she found on his face was not anger. It was the specific expression of a man who has been bracing for something for a long time and has finally arrived at the moment he was bracing for and has nothing left to protect himself with except stillness. "I'm sorry," Zuri said. "I was lost. I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Kang-hyun said, which it clearly wasn't, but not in the way she'd thought. He walked into the room, stood at the far side of the desk, looked at the box like it was something he'd rather not be looking at. 6, Zuri said. He didn't answer. "There are 6 of them," she said. Not a question, not an accusation, yes. She looked at the box. Then at him. "Different women," she says. She absorbed that. Stood with it. "What happened?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "They found out something about me, and they left." The way he said it was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of untrue, she believed him. This wrong in the sense that the words were too simple for what they were carrying. Like a house with a very plain door that opens into something vast. "What did they find out?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment, considering. Then he closed the box. "Not tonight," he said. Zuri looked at the closed box, looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Not tonight." She left him there, moonbeam, and found her way back to her room, and she sat on the edge of her bed, in the dark, and turned the facts over in her mind the way you turn a stone in your hand when you're not sure yet whether it's interesting or just heavy. 6 women, 6 rings. 6 times a man had apparently gotten close enough to offer everything he had, and 6 times something had ended it. The 7th velvet pouch in that box was empty. She noticed that detail on the way out. She hadn't mentioned it. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about a man who bought chocolate croissants and framed children's drawings and gave women the only key to their room, and who had been left 6 times and was keeping the evidence in a box, like a person who expects a verdict and hasn't yet decided how to argue against it. If she'd had her phone out, she would have texted Camille. Instead, she just lay there in the quiet of the enormous estate and listened to the sound of her own thinking, and somewhere down the hall a clock ticked, and outside the garden was dark and still, and Zuri Ellington began, without entirely meaning to revise everything she thought she'd understood about why she'd come here. She told herself she'd come for the lease situation, for the loan debt, for the time to figure things out. She was starting to suspect that wasn't the whole truth. Zuri didn't sleep well that night. Not because the bed was uncomfortable. It was the most expensive mattress she'd ever been horizontal on, and under different circumstances, she would have spent a week simply appreciating it. She didn't sleep because every time she closed her eyes, she saw that wooden box, and the 6 velvet pouches, and the one that was empty, and she kept running the arithmetic of what that meant for a man who had apparently spent years trying to build something with someone, and failing 6 consecutive times. She got up at 5:40 and went to the kitchen. Kang-hyun was already there. This surprised her less than it would have a week ago. She'd started to understand that he didn't sleep much either, or at least that his sleep happened in different hours than most people's, and that the kitchen in the early morning was where he went when his mind wouldn't settle. He stood at the counter with both hands wrapped around a mug, wearing a plain dark sweater and sweatpants. And without the jacket and the formality, he looked different, not smaller. That wasn't possible, but less armored. More like a person who was tired. He looked at her when she came in. She looked at him. Neither of them mentioned the study. Zuri went to the coffee maker, made herself a cup, stood on the opposite side of the kitchen island from him, and drank it in silence that was not comfortable, but was honest, which she had started to prefer to comfortable lies. After a while, she said, "Do you always wake up this early?" "Usually." "Why?" He considered the question like it was more complicated than it appeared. Old habit. There was a period when early morning was the safest time to work. She understood what kind of work he meant. She didn't ask him to clarify. "I wake up early because my brain starts talking before I'm ready," she said. "I never figured out how to make it stop." He looked at her over his mug. "What's it talk about this morning?" "You." "Mostly." She said it plainly because she was tired and honesty was easier than management at 5:45 in the morning. "Specifically that box." A beat of silence. "I shouldn't have had it where you could find it," he said. "I was lost. That wasn't your fault. Still, can I ask you something?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Not about what's in them. Just why do you keep them?" He looked at the far wall, quiet for a long moment. "'Cause I gave them," he said finally. "They happened. Throwing them away doesn't change that they happened. It just makes it look like I'm pretending they didn't." Zuri stood with that. "That's actually a pretty healthy way to look at it," she said. "A therapist told me something similar, several years ago." She blinked. "You have a therapist?" Something crossed his face that was almost amusement. "Does that surprise you?" "A little." "Why?" She opened her mouth. Closed it. Because she'd been about to say something about what she'd assumed about men like him, and she was self-aware enough to hear how that sounded before it came out. "Fair point," she said instead. "Never mind." He almost smiled at that. She was starting to recognize the almost smiles. A sound like green wood splitting. They were different from the full one, subtler, happening mostly at the corners of his eyes rather than his mouth. But they were there, and she was beginning to collect them the same way she'd collected the other things. Quietly, without making a decision about what she was building. It was Jamin who first told her about Cha Seolmi, though he didn't mean to. It happened on a Wednesday, day 22, when Zuri was coming back from a walk through the estate's rear garden. She'd taken to walking in the mornings after the early kitchen conversations became a habit, their version of shared time that required nothing from either of them except showing up. She was coming back through the side entrance when she heard Jaemin on the phone just inside the doorway, speaking in rapid Korean, and she caught the word seal, tit-heat, twice before she recognized she was overhearing something and stepped back outside. She didn't go back in for another 10 minutes. When she did, Jaemin was off the phone and visibly calibrating. He was a man who calibrated quickly. She'd noticed that about him. He processed situations fast and adjusted accordingly, which was probably what made him good at his job. "Who's Seolmi?" Zuri asked. His calibration slowed for just a moment. "Someone from before," he said. "From before, like one of the 6? His expression answered before he did. "First one," he said. And then carefully, "She's going to be at the hospital fundraiser next week." "I thought you should know before someone else mentioned it." Zuri absorbed this. "How bad is it going to be?" she asked. Jaemin chose his next words with the attention of a man diffusing something. "She doesn't wish Mr. Seo harm," he said, "but she has opinions about situations like yours. She's expressed them before. To other women who were in your position." "What kind of opinions?" He looked at her steadily. "The kind that end arrangements early." Sha Seolmi was exactly the kind of woman who walked into a room and made other women immediately aware of the seams in their dresses. She was perhaps 40 Korean slim, in the way that suggested discipline rather than luck, wearing charcoal silk that moved like it had been trained, with a face that was both beautiful and oddly tired, as though she'd been carrying something a long time that nobody else could see. The hospital fundraiser was held in the daytime, a smaller event than the gala, a luncheon and tour of the new pediatric wing Kang-hyun had partially funded. Zuri wore a wrap dress in deep blue and felt reasonably confident about it until Seolmi appeared at their table, and Zuri felt the temperature in her own chest drop 3 degrees. Kang-hyun saw Seolmi and went still, not dramatically, not the way actors go still in films. Just the quality of his attention shifted, the way a room shifts when a draft comes through a door you thought was closed. Seolmi greeted him in Korean, brief, controlled, the practiced warmth of people who knew each other when they were different people. Then she looked at Zuri. "You must be the current arrangement," she said in English. Smooth, uncalculated sounding, which was exactly what made it calculated. Zuri said, "Zuri Ellington. And you are?" "An old friend." Seolmi said it with a small smile that had years of history packed into it. "Though I'm sure Kang-hyun has mentioned me." "He hasn't, actually." Zuri said it pleasantly. Something shifted in Seolmi's expression. She'd expected either defensiveness or embarrassment. She got neither. "That's unlike him," Seolmi said. "People are full of surprises." Zuri picked up her water glass. "Are you enjoying the event?" The conversation moved on, the way conversations do when neither party wants to escalate publicly. But Zuri felt Seolmi watching her through the remainder of the luncheon, the way you feel a bruise forming before you see it. On the car ride home, Kang-hyun said nothing about Seolmi. Zuri said nothing about Seolmi. They both sat in the back seat in a silence that was no longer the comfortable kind. It came to a head 3 days later. Zuri was in the library, her library. She'd started thinking of it that way, which was probably something she should examine, when Seolmi appeared in the doorway. Not at the estate. At a coffee shop downtown, where Zuri had gone for an afternoon by herself, because she had learned in the past year that she needed to occasionally be somewhere nobody was watching her, even kindly. She had her laptop and a cortado and a table near the window, and she was halfway through responding to emails when the chair across from her was pulled out, and Seolmi sat down in it. Zuri looked at her. "This isn't an accident, is it?" Zuri said. "No," Seol said. She had the directness of someone who'd decided to be honest and wasn't sure yet if she'd regret it. "I asked Jaemin's assistant where you were," which was overstepping. "I apologize for that specifically." Zuri waited. "I wanted to talk to you without Kang-hyun present," Seolmi said. "I thought that was fair." "To who to you?" Zuri closed her laptop. "Okay, talk." Seolmi wrapped both hands around her own coffee cup. She had the look of a woman rehearsing something she'd thought about saying for a while. "He's a good man," she said. "I want to be clear about that first. What I did to him was, she stopped, pressed her lips together. I was young and frightened, and I told people things I shouldn't have told anyone. That's my weight to carry, I know that. But Zuri said, but there's something he hasn't told you. Siomi looked at her steadily. He will tell you, eventually. He told each of us when he trusted us enough. And when he did, she paused. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to think carefully about what you actually want from this before he gets attached. Because every time someone leaves, it costs him more than the time before. Zuri looked at her for a long moment. What was it? She asked. What he told you that you told other people. Siomi shook her head. That's his. Then why are you here? Because I saw your face at lunch when I said current arrangement. Sio's voice changed slightly, stripped down to something closer to the truth. You didn't flinch. Any of the others would have flinched. And I've been watching him for 15 years, Zuri. I know what it looks like when he's starting to believe something is real. I'm here because I don't want to watch him survive a seventh time. Zuri sat with that. You still love him, she said. Siomi looked out the window. I love who he was. That's different. Zuri picked up her cortado, drank the rest of it. Put the cup down. I'll tell you something, she said. I spent 4 years with a man who told me what I was allowed to feel about myself. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to manage my decisions for my own good. This, she gestured at the space between them, looks a lot like that. I understand why you're doing it. I even think part of it is genuine. But the part where you decide in advance that I'm going to hurt him and need to be warned off? She shook her head. That part you need to keep. Siomi looked at her. He's going to tell you something, Siomi said quietly. And when he does, I want you to remember, I came here because I thought you could handle it. What's that mean? But Siomi had already pushed back her chair. She left her coffee, barely touched, and walked out through the door, and Zuri sat in the afternoon light and felt the shape of something she didn't yet have words for pressing against the inside of her chest. The conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear happened on day 29. She was coming back from the library at 11 at night, which had become a thing she did late reading, bare feet on the hallway floors, the estate quiet around her in a way she'd come to find genuinely settling instead of lonely. She was passing the door to Kang-hyun's secondary office, which was cracked, and she heard Jae-min's voice first, and then Kang-hyun's, and she was 3 steps past the door when she heard her own name. She stopped. She knew she should keep walking. She knew it the way you know most things you don't do anyway. She heard Kang-hyun say, she's going to find out eventually. Jae-min said something in Korean. Kang-hyun switched back to English. He did this when he wanted precision. She'd noticed English for things he needed to be exact about. It doesn't matter how she finds out. It matters what she does with it. And she's going to do what they all do. A pause. You don't know that, Jae-min said. I know the pattern. She's not the same as... She seems different at first, Kang-hyun said, and his voice was very quiet and very flat in the specific way that means a person has stopped hoping and replaced it with acceptance. They always seem different at first, and then they find out, and then they leave. That's what happens. I'm not saying it with bitterness, Jae-min. I stopped pretending it would go another way. Silence. Then Jae-min said something soft in Korean that Zuri couldn't catch. Kang-hyun didn't answer it. Zuri stood in the hallway, with both hands pressed flat against the wall, and breathed carefully through her nose and waited for the feeling in her chest to sort itself out into something she could name. What she felt was not pity. She'd been half afraid it would be pity, the kind that slides easily into condescension, the kind that makes you feel generous instead of honest. It wasn't that. It was something closer to recognition. She knew the precise mental posture of a person who had been disappointed enough times that they'd stopped not leaving room for a different outcome. She knew it because she'd been doing it, herself had walked into this estate, already half convinced. It would confirm everything Malcolm had spent 4 years telling her about what she deserved. Had been waiting, every single day, for the moment when Kang-hyun would show her the thing that proved the rumors right and the kindness wrong. He was doing the same thing. He was already grieving her leaving. She pushed herself off the wall and went back to her room and sat on the floor with her back against the bed, because the bed felt too far away from the ground and she needed to be close to something solid. She didn't say anything about it the next morning. She showed up to the kitchen at 5:50, and he was there, and she made her coffee, and they stood on opposite sides of the island, and she asked him whether he'd seen the weather report, and he said it would rain by noon, and she said she'd wanted to walk before it did, and he said the back path flooded by the east garden, and she should take the stone path instead. Normal, domestic, careful, like two people who had identified the minefield between them and were mapping routes around it rather than across. But something had shifted in Zuri. She'd spent the previous night thinking about Seo Mize's voice when she'd said every time someone leaves, it costs him more than the time before. She'd thought about the empty seventh pouch in the box. Sipsfully. She'd thought about a man who kept giving rings because the alternative was admitting he'd stopped believing in the thing the rings were supposed to mean. She had made a private decision. She wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. Telling someone you have decided to stay before you've proven it is a different kind of cruelty. It raises the stakes without doing the work. But she'd made it anyway, standing on the stone path in the early morning while the sky went gray, before rain. She was not going to be the seventh one to leave. She hadn't decided yet whether that was wisdom or stubbornness. Probably both. The construction site happened the following week, and it was the moment that changed things in a way Zuri couldn't reverse even if she'd wanted to. Kang-hyun's above-board business interests included a significant construction and development firm operating across Chicago's south and west sides. And on day 33, he asked if she wanted to come with him to one of the sites, a mixed-use residential project near Pilsen. He didn't explain why he'd asked. She didn't explain why she said yes. The site was organized chaos, concrete trucks, scaffolding, the particular noise of a structure becoming itself. Kang-hyun moved through it with the ease of someone who knew the landscape, stopping to speak with the foreman, checking something on a tablet Jae-min held, crouching briefly to look at a foundation element that apparently warranted closer attention. She was watching him from 30 feet away, thinking about nothing in particular, when the sound happened. It was a structural failure in a temporary support rig, a beam that had been improperly secured to a secondary scaffold giving way on the third level. She heard the crack before she understood what it meant, and then there was a shout and the boom of something large hitting the ground, and when the dust cleared enough to see, there was a man named Torres. She'd heard someone use his name earlier, trapped beneath a fallen beam, approximately the width of her torso, pinned at the legs, conscious, and shouting in pain. 3 of the other workers got there first, 2 on each end of the beam. They couldn't move it. A 4th man arrived. Still wouldn't lift. Kang-hyun had been 40 feet away. By the time Zuri registered what was happening, he was already there, and he stripped off his jacket without ceremony, without theater, and stepped into the space under the collapsed scaffold, assessed what he was dealing with for perhaps 4 seconds, and then he put his hands under the beam and lifted. Not all at once. Not clean. His whole body loaded with it. She could see the effort travel through him from his legs up, and he didn't get it fully clear, but he got it enough. Got it off Torres, got it stable enough that 2 other workers could brace it, while a 3rd and 4th pulled Torres free. Kang-hyun held the beam until Torres was clear. Then he set it down. He stood up, rolled his right shoulder once. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, and there was concrete dust across the front of it, and he looked around for the foreman with the expression of a man who had a series of pointed safety questions to ask, and wasn't going to ask them pleasantly. Torres' daughter, a girl maybe 8 or 9 who'd been somewhere on the site, Zuri hadn't noticed her for before, came running through the cluster of workers. She pushed through to where her father was sitting against a stack of materials and threw herself at him, and Torres grabbed her with his uninjured arm and held on. Then the girl turned and saw Kang-hyun standing there, still covered in dust. She walked over to him. She held out her hand the way small children do when they've been taught to shake hands and take the instruction very seriously. Kang-hyun crouched, took her hand, shook it once, carefully, the way adults shake children's hands when they're actually paying attention. The girl said something in Spanish. Kang-hyun looked at Jae-min. Jae-min translated. She says, "Thank you for catching her, Dad." Kang-hyun looked at the girl for a moment. "Tell her. He did the hard part," he said. He stayed awake. Zuri was standing 20 feet away, with both arms crossed tight over her chest watching this happen. And the problem, the real problem, the one she'd been managing and not acknowledging for 2 weeks, was that she had stopped watching Seo Kang-hyun, the way you watch a dangerous man you're cautiously evaluating. She was watching him the way you watch someone you are afraid of losing. That was a significant distinction. She stood with it, in the noise and dust of the construction site, and let it be true, because she was 32 years old and she'd spent enough of her life managing feelings instead of having them. When Kang-hyun stood and turned and found her, with his eyes across the site, his expression shifted. She wasn't sure what she looked like from the outside. Whatever it was, it made him go careful again, that protective stillness, that retreat behind his own walls, and she watched him look at her and misread what he saw. He thought she was afraid. He thought she'd just watched him lift that beam, and the rumors had clicked into place. And this was the moment when she finally understood what everyone else already knew about him. She could see him withdrawing from where she stood. And she was about to say something, to cross the distance and correct him, when one of the workers came up to him with a question about the structural inspection, and the moment passed. He was quiet on the drive home. Jae-min sat in the front and said nothing. Zuri sat beside Kang-hyun in the back and thought about the distance between what people showed and what they meant, and whether she could find the right words for it. A sound like green wood splitting, and whether the right words even existed for something that had been built wrong so many times by so many people that neither of them really trusted words anymore anyway. The confrontation happened that evening, and it started with Zuri walking into the kitchen intending to make an argument, and instead walking into the counter. Not a fall, more of a heavy lean that misjudged the counter's position by approximately 4 inches, which meant her hip met the edge at an angle that was not designed for human hips, and she let out a sound that was not dignified. And when she turned around to regroup, Kang-hyun was standing in the doorway. "I'm fine," she said immediately. "I know, I do this constantly." "It's not I know," he said again, not dismissive. Just he'd actually accepted this about her, and she hadn't noticed him accepting it, and that caught her off guard. She turned and faced him properly. "Can I say something?" He waited. "At the construction site today," she said. "You saw my face, and you thought I was afraid of you." He didn't confirm or deny it, which was its own kind of confirmation. "I wasn't afraid of you," she said. She stopped. Chose words carefully. "I was thinking about what it must be like to move through the world in a body that people are scared of, when the thing you actually are is the person who lifts the beam off the trapped man." The kitchen was very quiet. "People are so focused on what you could break," she said. "They can't see what you're holding together." Kang-hyun was still. Completely still, the way he went when something reached past his defenses before he could redirect it. "Zuri," he said. "I know you expect me to leave," she said. "I heard you tell Jae-min." Something changed in his face. "I wasn't," he started. "I know you weren't trying to be cruel," she said. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you've already written the ending to this. And I need you to at least consider the possibility that you're wrong." The silence between them was the kind that has weight to it. Kang-hyun looked at her for a long moment, not retreating, not advancing, just looking at her, like he was trying to find something in her face that either confirmed or contradicted what he'd trained himself to believe. Then he took one step toward her. One step. And Zuri felt the kitchen get smaller, and her heart do something completely inconvenient. Then he stopped. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "What I told Seo-mi. What I've told each of them he paused. When I thought it was going somewhere real." "Okay," she said. "Not tonight," he said. "You keep saying that. Because tonight I need it to be true." His voice was quiet and exact, and the most honest thing she'd heard from him yet. "When I tell you, I need you to know it from a place where you already understand who I am." "I'm not there yet. I don't think we're there yet." Zuri looked at him. "How long?" she said. "I don't know." She breathed, in through her nose, out through her mouth. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. But I need you to stop writing the ending." He looked at her. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I'm choosing to be here. Every morning I get up and I make that choice. I need you to let me make it, instead of assuming I've already made the other one." Another beat. Then Kang-hyun said, "I'll try." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. It was the most honest thing either of them had said all week, and it cost him something to say it, and she heard that. She also heard the thing he didn't say, which was that trying was genuinely difficult for someone who had been left 6 times by people who'd made the same implicit promise. Trying meant cracking the door. Trying meant risking what came through it. She took a step toward him. He didn't move back. She raised her hand and put it against his chest, flat, over the place where his heart was doing something she could actually feel through the fabric. And they stood like that in the kitchen light for a moment, not kissing, not embracing, just 2 people who'd been broken, in different ways occupying the same space and not running from it. Then Zuri caught her hip on the counter again, same spot, and swore under her breath, and Kang-hyun's hand came to her arm to steady her, and for one brief involuntary second, they were both laughing real laughter. Surprised out of them, and then they were standing with his hand on her arm, and her laughing subsiding into something quieter, and neither of them moved. He looked at her. She looked at him. Stuckifty. His head dropped just slightly, the way a person's head drops when they're considering closing a distance and haven't decided yet, and Zuri felt every cell in her body make a vote, and the vote was unanimous. And she was leaning toward him when Hwa-ran's voice floated down the hallway in a tone of deliberate loudness. "Jae-min, I believe I left my tea in the kitchen." "Would you mind, Halmoni?" Jae-min said, somewhere off in the distance. "No, Hwa-ran said loudly. I insist on checking." The kitchen. Right now, Kang-hyun stepped back. Zuri pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling. The sound of Hwa-ran's slippered feet on the hallway floor, making absolutely no attempt at quiet, grew closer and then stopped, and then retreated. And the sound like green button, and there was a muffled comment that sounded like finally, and another that sounded like took them long enough. And Jae-min said something in Korean that Zuri suspected was an apology to the universe. They were left alone in the kitchen, and the moment was thoroughly gone, and Zuri laughed again differently, this time softer, and said, "Your grandmother is terrifying." "Yes," Kang-hyun said. He sounded wrecked in a quiet way that Zuri found she liked too much for comfort. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time. She was not sorry about what she'd said. She was not sorry about the hand on his chest or the laughter or the inch of space between them that Hwa-ran had blown apart with spectacular timing. What she was, lying there in the dark at 10 minutes past midnight on day 33 of a 90-day arrangement, was genuinely and thoroughly in trouble. The kind of trouble that feels like falling, and the problem with being someone who fell constantly was that she'd never quite learned the difference between stumbling and choosing to go down. She was starting to think she'd chosen this one. She closed her eyes, and on the nightstand, her phone lit up with a message from Camille that said, "How's it going?" And Zuri stared at the ceiling and typed back fine and put the phone face down because some things were not yet ready to be said out loud. The night settled around the estate. In the morning, she would go back to the kitchen, and he would be there, and the distance between them would be exactly what it was tonight, close enough to feel, too careful to cross, and something was going to have to give, and they both knew it, and neither of them was ready for what giving it would actually cost. The envelope was beside her coffee cup. Not underneath it, not near it, beside it. Precisely the way something is placed when the person placing it wants it to be found immediately, and not by accident. A plain white envelope with her name written on the front, in block letters that were too uniform to be casual and too careful to be rushed. Zuri stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it. Kang-hyun was not there yet. It was 5:53. She was 2 minutes early, which meant whoever had left the envelope had been here within the last few minutes or had known exactly when she would arrive, and neither option was comfortable. She crossed the kitchen and picked it up. Inside were photographs. 8 of them, printed on standard paper, the kind of prints you pull from a home office printer when you want something fast, and aren't concerned about quality. Each photograph showed a woman. Different women, different ages, different ethnicities, different contexts. Some were candid shots, the kind taken in public spaces. Some looked like they'd been pulled from social media profiles. Across the bottom of each photograph, in the same block handwriting as the envelope, was a name and a date. 6 women, 6 names. Zuri knew, before she finished looking through them, who these women were. The seventh photograph was different. It was her. Taken from outside the estate's front gate, through the iron bars, on a day she'd walked to the mailbox. She was in a yellow sweater she hadn't worn since day 8. Whoever had taken it had been outside the property and had a lens long enough to reach her clearly at that distance. The 8th photograph was Seo Mimi, no name written underneath. Just 4 words in the same block print, ask why she really left. Zuri set the photographs on the counter, set them down carefully, the way you handle things when your hands want to be less steady than you're allowing them to be. She stood looking at them. Outside the kitchen window, the garden was gray and damp, the sky coming up slow and colorless, the way Chicago mornings did in the weeks before autumn actually committed. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Kang-hyun walked in and stopped. He looked at her face first, then at the counter. His expression moved through several things very quickly: recognition, then a kind of controlled alarm, and then it went still in the way. It went still when he was operating. "When did you find this?" he said. "Just now, 2 minutes ago." He crossed to the counter, picked up the photographs, went through them with the focused attention of someone reading a document rather than looking at images. When he reached the one of Zuri, something happened in his jaw. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "Don't do the thing where you decide this is your fault and close off," she said. "We need to figure out what this actually is." He put the photographs down. Someone was outside the gate, with a long lens, yes. At least a week ago, that's when I wore that sweater. Which means they've been watching for at least a week, or longer, and that's just the shot they decided to use. She crossed her arms over her chest. Not defensively, she was cold. The kitchen hadn't warmed up yet, and she hadn't made coffee, and adrenaline was doing something unpleasant to her circulation. "Someone got inside the house," Kang-hyun. "They put this beside my coffee cup. They knew which cup was mine." His expression confirmed that he'd already reached this conclusion and did not like it. He pulled out his phone. "Jae-min," he said when the call connected, and then he spoke in Korean for approximately 90 seconds. And Zuri watched his face while he did, and understood from the quality of his stillness that what he was saying and what Jae-min was responding with was not good. He ended the call. "Nobody was on the interior overnight except permanent staff," he said. "Then it's staff, or someone who got in and out without being recorded, which is..." He stopped. Started again. "The security system had a diagnostic update at 3:40 this morning. There's a 14-minute window where the interior cameras in the kitchen wing were offline. 14 minutes. Plenty of time for someone who knew the layout." "Someone knew about the update," Zuri said. "Yes. Which means someone inside knows your schedule, including your security maintenance schedule." He was quiet. "You already know what that means," she said. "It means the problem isn't outside the gate." His voice was very flat and very controlled. "It's inside it." Jae-min had the estate locked down within 30 minutes. Staff were accounted for, exterior security doubled, and the photographs were bagged and handled with the specific efficiency of people who had done this kind of work before. Zuri sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee someone had made, not Kang-hyun, one of the security staff. She didn't know which, and watched the estate's controlled response to a breach, and thought about the note on the back of Seo Mi's photograph. Ask why she really left. It was not a threat. It wasn't designed to frighten her. It was designed to send her to Seo Mi, or to send Seo Mi to her, and use whatever came out of that conversation as a lever. Someone wanted them talking. Someone wanted information or disruption to flow between Seo Mi and Zuri, and had decided that a set of photographs left beside a coffee cup was the most efficient delivery mechanism. She was still turning this over when Jae-min came in and said the envelope had been hidden inside a flower delivery that had arrived the previous afternoon. The flowers had been inspected at the gate exterior of the bundles, stems, the outer packaging, and the envelope had been taped to the inside of a secondary paper, wrapping around a bundle of tulips that had gone directly to the kitchen counter without a second look. "Someone told them about the flowers," Zuri said. "The weekly flower order is on the household schedule," Jae-min said. Carefully, not looking at Kang-hyun when he said it. "Which is internal," Kang-hyun said. Jae-min nodded. The three of them sat with that for a moment. I need to see Seo Mi, Zuri said. Both men looked at her. Not because the note told me to, she said. Because she came to me 2 weeks ago and told me there was something Kang-hyun needed to tell me, and that she'd come because she thought I could handle it, and I sent her away. That conversation isn't finished. Zuri Kang-hyun started. Someone is using her photograph as a message, she said. Either she sent it herself, which means she's involved, and I need to know that, or someone is using her as a tool, which means she needs to know that. Either way, the conversation needs to happen. Kang-hyun looked at her for a long moment. Not alone, he said. Obviously not alone. Seo Mi agreed to meet within 2 hours, which was either because she'd been expecting the call or because she moved quickly when she decided to move. She arrived at the estate in a car that cost more than Zuri's entire previous apartment building, wearing a cream coat and the particular expression of a woman who had already decided how much she was willing to say before she walked through the door. They met in the estate's formal sitting room, which Zuri had barely used, and which felt, this morning, exactly like what it was, a room designed for conversations that required distance. Jaemin stood near the door. Not ostentatiously, he was just there, the way he was always just somewhere, available and watchful. Kang-hyun sat in the chair across from Seo Mi. Zuri sat beside him. Seo Mi looked at the photographs on the coffee table between them. Looked at her own face with the specific expression of someone seeing something they didn't arrange. I didn't send this, she said. I know, Zuri said. Seo Mi looked at her. If you'd sent it, you wouldn't have come, Zuri said. You'd have waited to see what it produced. You came in 20 minutes, which means it scared you. Something shifted in Selm's face, a small recalibration. You're sharper than I gave you credit for, she said. Most people are. Seo Mi set her bag on the seat beside her. Someone has been asking questions about me for the last 3 weeks. About the engagement. About why it ended. She folded her hands. I didn't think much of it at first. People have always been curious. But the questions became specific. They wanted to know what I'd told people about Kang-hyun. Which people, what I'd said exactly. Who was asking? Kang-hyun said. His voice was quiet and direct, and had an edge to it that Zuri had not heard before. I never spoke to them directly. It came through someone in my husband's business circle. A man named Vane. She looked at Kang-hyun. Do you know him? Zuri's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down. Malcolm Vane, she said. Seo Mi turned to her. You know him. The kitchen was very quiet. He was my fiancé, Zuri said. Until about a year ago. The silence in the room changed quality. Became something denser. Seo Mi looked at Kang-hyun. Then back at Zuri. He's been asking about you as well. About the arrangement. About how much access you have to the estate. Specifically about whether you have access to Kang-hyun's private business records. Zuri heard this and felt something cold move through her that was not surprise. Not quite. It was something worse than surprise it was. The feeling of a shape she hadn't been able to see suddenly snapping into focus all at once. He wasn't asking about Kang-hyun, she said. He was asking about me. Yes, Seo Mi said. Because of my father. She said it before she'd decided to say it. The words came out with the weight something she'd been carrying, without examining, and had just put down on the table in front of everyone. Kang-hyun looked at her. My father, Desmond Ellington, was a financial consultant, she said, and her voice was steady because she needed it to be. He died 4 years ago. Cardiac event, very sudden. After he died, I went through his estate and found files I didn't understand. Financial documents, transaction records, corporation names I'd never heard of. I thought they were client files. I boxed them up and put them in storage because I didn't know what else to do with them, and I was grieving and I couldn't look at them. She stopped, started again. Malcolm came into my life 3 months after my father died. The room was absolutely silent now. He said he'd known my father professionally, that they'd had a business relationship, that he wanted to pay his respects. She looked at the photographs on the coffee table. He was very kind, very patient. He never seemed rushed. He took 4 years building something that looked like love, and She stopped again. Something moved through her face that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite fury and was some compound of both that didn't have a clean name. I was lonely and I'd just lost my father, and he was patient and kind, and he made me feel chosen. She looked at Kang-hyun. He was trying to get access to my father's files, she said. He thought my father left me the access information. Whatever those files contain, Malcolm thinks they're valuable enough to spend 4 years pretending to love someone to get to them. The weight of it sat in the room. Seol-mi was very still. What was in the files? She said. I don't know. I never opened them after the initial look. I put them in storage and didn't touch them. Where's the storage unit? Kang-hyun said. Bridgeport, my mother's neighborhood. She's had the unit since before I was born. She just added my father's boxes when he died because it was easier than sorting through them. Kang-hyun looked at Jae-min. Jae-min was already on his phone. The next 4 hours were the most technically efficient and emotionally disorienting 4 hours of Zuri's life. Jae-min made calls. People Zuri hadn't met arrived at the estate, spoke briefly with Kang-hyun and left. The security team ran whatever they ran. Zuri sat in the library, her library still, even now, and called her mother, and had a conversation she had been not having for 4 years. Her mother, Zuri Ellington, was a woman who had survived her husband's death with the particular grace of someone who deals with grief by staying useful. She cried green wood splitting. She cried twice during the phone call and answered every question Zuri asked with the focused clarity of someone who'd been waiting for these questions and was relieved they'd finally arrived. Yes, she knew about the storage unit. No, she'd never opened Desmond's boxes. He'd asked her once, a few months before he died, not to go through his work files if anything happened to him. He'd said he'd made arrangements. He'd said someone would come. Nobody had come. Did he say who would come? Zuri asked. Celestine was quiet for a moment. He said it would be someone I trusted completely. He said I'd know when the right person showed up, because they'd know to ask about the yellow envelope. The yellow envelope. That's what he said. There's a yellow envelope in the bottom of the second box. He said I'd know the right person, because they'd know to ask for it by name. Zuri sat with this. Mom, Malcolm Vane told me he knew Dad professionally. A beat of silence. Malcolm Vane has never set foot in your father's office, Celestine said. Her voice was very flat and very certain. Your father mentioned him once. He said Vane was a man who built things on top of other people's foundations and called it construction. Zuri closed her eyes. I'll explain everything, she said. I promise. But I need you to not go to the storage unit today. I need you to go to Aunt Renee's and stay there until I call you. Celestine asked no questions. She simply said, How much trouble are you in, baby? Some, Zuri said honestly, but I'm in the right place. She wasn't certain that was true. She said it anyway, because her mother needed something true-sounding to hold on to, and Zuri was the one who had to provide it. She found Kang-hyun in his study. He was at the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking at something on his laptop with the concentrated attention that meant he was working through something he hadn't yet solved. 2 empty coffee cups were pushed to the side. The wooden box with the velvet pouches was not visible, which meant he'd put it somewhere else, and she noticed that detail without knowing what to do with it. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. I need to tell you something, she said. Sit down, I'd rather stand. She came into the room, stood on the far side of the desk. I need to tell you something that I should have told you when I arrived. Except I didn't know it was relevant when I arrived, and I'm not sure I fully understood it myself until today. He waited. She told him about Desmond. All of it, the financial files, the storage unit, the yellow envelope her mother didn't know the contents of. The way Malcolm had appeared in her life 3 months after her father's death, with the patience of a man on a timeline that nobody else could see. She told him about the 4 years, and the way Malcolm had methodically eroded her sense of herself, not because he hated her, but because a woman who didn't trust her own judgment was a woman who could be managed, and he'd needed someone manageable. She told him about the day she'd left Malcolm, which had not been dramatic. It had been a Tuesday. She'd come home from work and found him in her apartment going through her father's personal correspondence, which she'd kept in a box in her closet. And she'd stood in the way looking at him in the box, and Understood with the absolute clarity of something that had been assembling itself for a long time, without her permission, that she had been constructed into a tool. She'd packed a bag while he tried to explain. She hadn't listened to the explanation. She'd left. When she finished telling Kang-hyun, the room was quiet. Zzn. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, not the controlled blankness he used in professional contexts, not the careful warmth he'd been building toward her, something more stripped than either. Something that looked like a man genuinely reckoning with information and not yet finished reckoning. He targeted you because of your father's files, he said. Yes, which means the arrangement. Coming here. He paused. That's what brought him out. Your proximity to my organization made his timeline urgent. That's what I think. He's using Seoul me as a pressure point because she's already in your orbit. He needed to create enough disruption to either drive you out of the estate and back into his reach, or create enough instability inside the estate that someone panics and makes a mistake he can use. Or, Zuri said, he wanted me scared enough to go back to him. Kang-hyun looked at her. He knows I'm here, she said. He knows why. And whatever my father documented, whatever's in those files, it's something Malcolm can't afford to have surface. He knows I'm here with resources and a reason to actually go through them, and that scares him more than any arrangement. Kang-hyun was quiet for a moment. Do you know what was in the files, he said. Not specifically, but my father had clients connected to shell corporations and foreign financial structures. He was a consultant, but he was careful, too careful. A sound like green wood splitting, the kind of careful that means you've seen something you know is wrong and you're building a record because you don't know yet what you're going to do with it. He was documenting it, Kang-hyun said. I think so. Which means someone else knew he was documenting it. Or figured it out after. Malcolm's network, she said. Or whoever Malcolm is working for. My father died of a cardiac event, but he was 61 and he'd run marathons until he was 58. He wasn't, she stopped. The thought was not new. It had lived in the back of her mind, the funeral in a box since the funeral she'd kept closed by choosing not to open it. He wasn't the kind of man who should have died that way. The words sat in the room. Kang-hyun stood up from the desk. He came around to her side and stood close, not touching, just within reach, and looked at her with the direct attention of someone who has decided to stop hedging. I need to tell you something, he said. Her pulse did something uncooperative. Now, she said. Now, because what you just told me changes what I've been waiting to tell you, and I'm not waiting anymore. She braced. He told her. It was not what she'd expected. The rumors that had circulated about Seo Kang-hyun, the things whispered in wealthy circles, the reason 6 women had eventually walked away were not about violence. Not about cruelty or darkness or some fundamental defect in his character. They were about his hands. Specifically, about a condition he'd been born with that had been managed throughout his childhood and his adult life, but never eliminated a form of essential tremor that affected his hands under specific conditions. Not visibly most of the time, not in any way that impaired his daily function or his work or the control he exercised with such precision. But in moments of acute emotion, fear, or grief, or the particular vulnerability of intimacy with someone he trusted, his hands shook. It was not dangerous. It was not a warning sign of anything worse. It was simply a physical reality of his body, one that had been private until Seo Mi shared it, and once shared it, became something people felt entitled to discuss, to exaggerate, to reframe as evidence of instability in a man of his size and profession and power. The rumors said his hands were unreliable, that his control was a performance, that the tremor meant something darker. Women had arrived at the arrangement already knowing a distorted version of the story. They'd looked for the signs. They'd interpreted normal behavior through the lens of what they'd been told. And when his trust in them reached the point where he shared the truth directly, what he found on their faces was the confirmation of everything he'd feared they already believed. The truth that he had conditioned he hadn't chosen, managed carefully, and lived with honestly was less terrifying than the rumor. But by the time they knew the truth, the rumor had already done its work. Zuri stood looking at him. That's it, she said. He waited. That's what they left over. She said it carefully. Not dismissively carefully, with the weight of what it actually cost him, sitting clearly in the space between them. A tremor you were born with. That they were told made me unpredictable, he said. Dangerous in ways I couldn't control. You understand the specific kind of fear that generates. In a man your size. Yes, she understood completely. Seo told people. Seo told one person she trusted. That person told the right people and the wrong story. He didn't say it with bitterness, just with the exact accuracy of someone who'd had years to understand what happened and why. By the third engagement, the woman already knew a version of it before we met. By the sixth, you expected it, she said. I stopped expecting anything else. She looked at his hands. He let her. Steady at the sides of his body, large and still, the hands that had lifted the beam and repaired Hwaran's bracelet and shaken a 6-year-old's hand with complete seriousness. Has it happened? She said, since I've been here? He looked at her directly twice. Briefly. Both times when we were... He stopped. Close, she said. Yes. She looked at his hands for another moment. Then she crossed the remaining distance between them and put both of her hands around one of his and held it. She felt under her palms the faintest tremor, barely perceptible. The kind of thing that would vanish completely the moment the emotion that produced it resolved. She held on anyway. This is why you wouldn't close the distance, she said. In the kitchen. On the night, I didn't want you to feel it before you knew what it was. I didn't want you to be afraid before you understood. I'm not afraid, she said. He looked at her hands over his. I know, he said. And then quietly, with the specific exhaustion of someone setting down something very heavy, that's the problem. She didn't understand that yet. She would understand that being believed, after years of preparing not to be, was its own kind of destabilizing thing. That Kang-hyun didn't know how to receive it without bracing for it to be taken back. But she understood it enough. She was still holding his hand when Jae-min appeared in the study doorway. His expression made her let go. Jae-min said, we have a problem. The storage unit, Kang-hyun said. Someone got there first. The unit has been accessed. The lock was cut. Zuri's stomach dropped. The boxes, she said. Most of them are still there. But the second box, Jae-min looked at her. The one your mother described. It's been opened and partially emptied. The yellow envelope, Zuri said. Still there. Whoever went through it was looking for digital media. Drives, memory cards. They didn't take paper. The yellow envelope was paper. Zuri thought about what her father had said to her mother. Someone would come. They'd know to ask for the yellow envelope. I'd know the right person. Desmond Ellington had been a careful man. The kind of careful that meant he'd known, at some point, that the wrong people might come first. That he'd built the document trail with that in mind. He left the paper, she said. Both men looked at her. My father knew. If whatever he documented ever got out, whoever was looking for it would look for digital first. Evidence you can destroy. He put the real information on paper. In a yellow envelope, in a storage unit under my mother's name, not his. She looked at Kang-hyun. He was protecting it. He was protecting you, Kang-hyun said. The thought hit her somewhere that wasn't quite her chest, and wasn't quite anywhere she could point to. Her father, 4 years dead, had known something was wrong, had known the wrong people were watching, and had built something designed to outlast him and reach the right person. He'd trusted Celestine to hold it. He'd trusted Zuri to be the person who came. I need to get that envelope, she said. Zuri, I know what you're going to say. And you're right that it's not safe. But those are my father's records. That's his work. Whatever he was trying to expose, it killed him, and if it killed him, and if Malcolm Vane spent 4 years building a fake relationship to get access to it, then whatever is in that envelope is the one thing that can end this. She looked at Kang-hyun steadily. And I'm not going to wait for Malcolm to figure out he missed it. The study was very quiet. Outside, wind moved through the estate's garden. Kang-hyun looked at her for a long time. Then he said, we go together. It was not a question and not a negotiation. It was the voice of a man who had decided something and was done deliberating. Zuri nodded. Jae-min said, tonight? Tonight, Kang-hyun said. But tonight, as it turned out, was already too late because Zuri's phone rang at that moment and the number on the screen was her mother's cell. And when she answered it, the voice on the other end was not her mother's. It was Malcolm's, he said, very calmly. The way he'd always said things that were designed to cut. She's fine. She'll stay fine. Bring me the yellow envelope, Zuri. Come alone. You have 6 hours. The call ended. Zuri stood holding her phone in the study of the Sessa estate, with Kang-hyun's eyes on her face, and Jaemin already moving, and the phone screen going dark in her hand, and the thing inside her that had been cracking since the morning she'd found that envelope beside her coffee cup, finally broke the rest of the way open. Not into panic, into something colder and far more focused than panic, something she hadn't known she possessed until this moment, something that felt like her father's patience and her mother's stillness, and 4 years of being diminished by a man who'd calculated her grief and called it love. She lowered the phone. She looked at Kang-hyun. He has my mother, she said. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. Surprised him too. She could see it, the way he looked at her, reassessing something he thought he'd already measured. And in the space of that moment, with 6 hours on a clock she hadn't agreed to, and her mother somewhere in Malcolm Vane's reach, and a yellow envelope in a Bridgeport storage unit containing whatever her father had died to protect, Zuri Ellington made a decision that no version of herself from a year ago would have recognized. She was not going alone. She was not going as the woman Malcolm had spent 4 years constructing. She looked at Kang-hyun and said, "Tell me what we do." Kang-hyun moved first. He was already at the desk pulling up the estate's security interface before Zuri finished the sentence, and Jaemin was on his phone speaking in rapid Korean before Kang-hyun said a single word to him. Because they had worked together long enough that the protocol activated on its own the moment the situation demanded it. Zuri stood in the center of the study. Zuri stood and held her phone and breathed through the specific cold that had settled in her chest and did not allow herself to think about her mother's face. Not yet. Not until she knew something useful. Location, Kang-hyun said. He didn't give one. He'll send it. 6 hours means he needs time to set up. He's not already where he wants to be. He looked at Jaemin. Pull Vane's Chicago properties. Personal and corporate. Anything connected to his network. Already running, Jaemin said. He'll pick something he controls. Somewhere he's had time to prepare. Kang-hyun looked at Zuri. Does he have a pattern? Properties, he returned to. Anywhere he felt secure? Zuri thought. 4 years of Malcolm. 4 years of his habits and preferences, and the specific geography of his comfort. He had a commercial property in Pilsen he never talked about. It was listed under a holding company, but I saw the documents once when he was careless with his laptop. He said it was a development project. He visited it twice a month and never invited me. Address? I don't have it, but the holding company name was Ardent Meridian LLC. He had a folder. Jaemin was already typing. Kang-hyun crossed to where Zuri stood and stopped in front of her. Close. He put one hand on her arm, not gripping, just present. Your mother is leverage, which means she's safe until the exchange. He needs her functional. I know. He needs you to come alone, because alone you're manageable. He built 4 years managing you. I know that too. He doesn't know that stopped working. Zuri looked at him. No, he doesn't. Something passed between them that wasn't a plan yet, but was the shape of one. I'm going, she said. I need to go because if I don't, he escalates. But I'm not going the way he expects. No, Kang-hyun said. You're not. Jaemin found the property in 11 minutes. Ardent Meridian LLC held 3 Chicago assets. 2 were active commercial developments with visible paper trails and contractor histories. The third was a former warehouse in the area east of Pilsen, purchased 4 years ago, permitted for renovation, 0 construction activity since acquisition. Sitting quiet, sitting ready. The 6-hour window gave them time they didn't waste. Kang-hyun's people moved the way Zuri imagined water moved through cracks, not loudly, not obviously, finding the lines of least resistance and filling them. She didn't ask for the details of how he mobilized or who he called. She understood enough to know that the breadth of his operation meant people were already in cars, already moving toward that warehouse neighborhood, already doing reconnaissance that would give them the building's layout before Malcolm had finished setting up whatever he imagined was a controlled situation. What she focused on was the yellow envelope. Jamin drove her to the Bridgeport storage facility at 8:17 p.m., two of Kang-hyun's security team running interference on the approach, and she walked into a green wood splitting, and she walked to her mother's storage unit under fluorescent light that hummed and flickered and smelled like old cardboard and the specific dry dust of things that had been sealed away from weather and time. The second box had been opened and partially sorted. Whoever Malcolm had sent was efficient. They'd gone through the box in a way that was organized, rather than frantic, removing things in categories, leaving behind what they'd evaluated as low value. Paper, handwritten notes, a manila folder of Desmond Ellington's personal correspondence. The yellow envelope was at the bottom, exactly where Celestine had said it would be. Letter-sized, sealed with 2 strips of tape that had been applied carefully, the edges pressed down with something flat. Her father's handwriting across the front, for the right person. "You know who you are." Zuri's hands were steady when she picked it up. She held it for a moment without opening it. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere in the facility, a metal door rolled open and closed it. She opened the envelope. Inside were 12 pages of her father's handwriting and a single folded sheet of paper with a different typeface, a letter, printed, addressed to no one specifically, dated 8 months before Desmond Ellington died. It was a detailed accounting of financial transactions Desmond had processed as a consultant for a network of companies that were, on paper, legitimate commercial entities and were, in function, vehicles for laundering money through construction contracts. $14 million across 3 years. The transactions were documented with dates, account numbers, company names, and in 3 cases, names of individuals at the top of the structure. Malcolm Vane's name was not on the list, but 3 of the company names matched entities or had seen in the folder on Malcolm's careless laptop 4 years ago. Malcolm wasn't at the top. He was in the middle, a connector, a fixer, someone who moved money between the structure and the legitimate front. Someone whose value to the people above him depended entirely on nobody ever finding this document. The last page of Desmond's handwritten notes said, "I reported this to federal financial crimes in October. I gave them copies. They have the digital records. What they don't have, what no one will be able to suppress or accidentally lose, is this. Keep it safe. Give it to someone who can use it. I love you." Zuri sat on the floor of the storage unit and read her father's last pages and did not cry, because there wasn't room for it yet. There would be room later. There would be a night, probably several, when she would sit with the fullness of what her father had done, and what it had cost him, and what he had left her, and she would grieve it properly. Tonight she folded the papers back into the yellow envelope and stood up and said to Jae-min, who was standing in the doorway, "Get Kang-hyun on the phone." Malcolm's location message arrived at 9:43 p.m. and addressed the warehouse in East Pilsen, which meant Jaemin's people already had 3 hours of intelligence on the building and knew the access points, the interior layout, the positions of the 2 men Malcolm had stationed outside and the additional 2 inside, and the room on the 2nd floor where a thermal sensor had identified 2 heat signatures, 1 mobile and 1 stationary. Celestine was there. She was stationary, which meant seated, which meant restrained, but the signatures was stable and normal, which meant she was conscious and uninjured. Zuri read this summary from Kang-hyun on the drive across the city and felt the cold in her chest convert into something more operational. "Less fear, more math. He has 4 men," she said. "That we've confirmed," Jae-min said from the driver's seat. "Possibly a 5th interior. The south side of the 2nd floor has a blind spot on the thermal." "He wouldn't come with less than 5, Kang-hyun said. He was beside Zuri in the back seat, jacket off, wearing dark clothes that made him look less like a businessman, and more like the other version of himself, the one his enemies understood, and she was only now seeing fully. "He expects me to come with more. He'll be ready for a siege." "He's not getting a siege," Zuri said. Both men looked at her. "He told me to come alone," she said. "So I come alone." Visibly, through the front, he gets what he asked for. He sees me walking in with the envelope. That's what he's watching for. That's where his attention goes. Kang-hyun was already shaking his head. "I'm the variable he hasn't planned for," she said. "He planned for you to storm the building. He planned for visible force, because that's what makes sense from his perspective. You're a mafia boss. You bring numbers, he responds to that. He did not plan for me to actually walk in. Because it's not safe, Kang-hyun said. Nothing tonight is safe. But I know Malcolm. I know exactly what he does when he thinks he's in control. He talks. She looked at Kang-hyun steadily. He needs me to understand why he did this. He needs to explain it. That's who he is. He spent 4 years explaining to me why I needed to be less, and he needs one more explanation. Give me that time. A beat of silence. How long? Kang-hyun said. 10 minutes. Maybe less. Enough to get my mother away from his men and get him talking and not moving. She held his gaze. Then you interpret alone very creatively. Jae-min made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Kang-hyun looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His hands on his thighs were still, and she knew now what that stillness cost him, and what it meant that he was maintaining it. If anything changes, I'll drop the envelope. Don't drop. I will literally drop the envelope on the floor, she said. That's your signal. The moment it hits the ground, you don't wait. He held her eyes. 10 minutes, he said. 8, Jae-min suggested from the front. 8, Kang-hyun said. The warehouse was exactly what she'd expected from the outside industrial anonymous, the kind of building that exists in cities as transitional space, waiting to become something, while currently being nothing. 2 loading dock doors, sealed with newer padlocks. A standard entry door on the east side, with light visible in the crack beneath it. A sound. Malcolm. The exterior men Malcolm had posted were good enough to be invisible from the street, which meant they'd clocked her approach before she reached the door and had already communicated her arrival upward. She knocked. The door opened after 4 seconds. The man who opened it was not someone she knew. He looked at her, looked past her at the street, and stepped aside. She walked in. The ground floor was open industrial space concrete, cold, the smell of old metal and standing water somewhere below floor level. Temporary lighting had been rigged from a generator she could hear running somewhere in the back. A staircase on the north wall, metal, not the kind that rang with every step. Up, the man said. She went up. The second floor was smaller, a former office level, rooms with interior windows that looked out over the main floor below. One room with light coming under the door. She pushed it open. Malcolm Vane was standing in the center of the room. He looked exactly like himself, which was the thing she'd forgotten she had to prepare for. Was 44's put together, the kind of man who could wear composure like a coat, regardless of what was happening underneath it. He was in dark slacks and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked, standing there in a makeshift room in a warehouse he'd bought 4 years ago, while planning something she was only now understanding the full scope of, like a man who had expected this and was not remotely surprised. Celestine Ellington was seated in a chair against the far wall. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her. She was upright, jaw set, expression communicating with complete clarity across the room that she was furious rather than frightened, and that whoever had put those zip ties on her was going to be hearing about it. Zuri looked at her mother. Her mother looked back. Her mother said, "Baby, this man has been talking for an hour and a half, and I need you to wrap this up." Malcolm's composure flickered. Zuri felt something loosen in her chest that had been held very tight since 9:43. She looked at Malcolm. "She's fine," she said. Not to him. To herself. "Of course she's fine," Malcolm said. "I'm not." He stopped. Adjusted his tone. "I'm not a monster, Zuri. That's a very specific thing to say to a woman whose mother you have zip-tied to a chair." His jaw moved. "This is a negotiation, not a threat. You called me and told me to come alone, or it wouldn't go well for her." "That's a threat, Malcolm. You can call it something else, but that's the word." He crossed his arms. She recognized the posture he used it when he was recalibrating, buying himself a half-second to find the right angle. "I need the envelope." "I know. Then give it to me and this ends. Your mother goes home. You go back to what?" He glanced away and back. "Whatever you're doing with Seo Kang-hyun. And this is finished." "What's in it for you?" she said. He blinked. "What?" "I understand what you need. I don't understand what you're offering. You said this is a negotiation, negotiate." He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. She watched him recalibrate again. He'd come in expecting one version of her. The version he'd built over 4 years, careful, managed, conflict avoidant, reflexively eager to smooth things over and find the version of events that let everyone leave without damage. He'd built that version with great patience, and he'd found her here instead, and she could see it, not quite sure what to do with the replacement. "You give me the envelope," he said, "and I walk away from whatever my interest was in your father's records. You, your mother, your arrangement, none of it involves me anymore." "And the people above you," she said. A beat. "What people above me?" "The 14 million, Malcolm. The 14 million my father documented across 3 years through 14 corporate entities, 3 of which appear in your files." She watched his face. He didn't just document the transactions. He reported them. Federally. Before he died. Something happened in Malcolm's expression that was very quick and very ugly. "The federal investigators have the digital records," she said. "What they don't have is my father's handwritten documentation, with the additional details he kept off the electronic trail specifically because he knew the electronic trail could be cleaned. That's what's in the envelope. And it's not something you walking away fixes. It's something that requires a different conversation entirely." "Give me the envelope," he said. His voice had changed. The composure was still there, but it was working harder. "Who are you protecting?" she said. "The names in my father's notes aren't yours. You're the connector, you're the middle, which means you're disposable to whoever is at the top, and whatever you promised them about managing this situation, you've been managing it for 4 years, and it's still here in my hand. At what point does being disposable become the actual problem?" His face tightened. "Give me the envelope, Zuri." "My father figured it out," she said. "That's what you've been afraid of, not the records. The fact that he figured it out while it was happening and built a paper trail and reported it and still died before it went anywhere. You've been managing the cleanup for 4 years because the people above you don't trust you to have it handled, and you know what happens when they stop trusting you." "Stop talking," he said. "You need this to disappear, and it won't disappear, and you're running out of time to make it look like you've handled it, and that's why you're in a warehouse in Pilsen with zip ties and a generator instead of at a table. Somewhere with lawyers." She looked at him directly. "You're scared. Give me the envelope." He took a step toward her. Behind him, Celestine said, "Don't you dare." The man who'd brought Zuri upstairs moved. Zuri dropped the envelope. She didn't think about it. Her hands were already making the decision as Malcolm's man stepped forward, and the yellow envelope hit the concrete with a flat smack that was almost inaudible under the sound of the generator. And she had time to think clearly and without panic that 8 minutes was either already up or close enough that it didn't matter. The sound from below was not dramatic at first. It was the sound of the ground floor door coming off its hinges, which was more mechanical than violent, a sudden release of pressure, a brief percussion, and then footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the organized speed of people who knew exactly where they were going because they'd spent the last hour learning the floor plan. Malcolm spun toward the door. His man grabbed Zuri's arm. She drove her elbow into his ribs, not skillfully, not with any training behind it, just with the committed force of a woman who had decided she was done being grabbed, and he grunted, and his grip loosened. And she pulled her arm free and moved toward her mother's chair and got her hands on the zip tie around Celestine's wrists just as the room's second door blew open. Kang-hyun came through it. No jacket, no visible weapon in his hands. Just the full, undisguised reality of what he was 6'4" of absolute physical authority, moving with the controlled speed of someone who had identified exactly where the threat was and was going there directly. Malcolm's man swung at him. Kang-hyun caught the arm, redirected it, planted the man against the wall with a single decisive movement that was less like a fight and more like a problem being solved, fast and without embellishment. Malcolm was moving, toward the envelope on the floor. "Don't," Zuri said. He didn't listen, he lunged for it. Zuri still had her hands on the zip tie around her mother's wrists, and she had approximately 2 seconds and no good options, and she did the only thing available, which was to kick the envelope sideways, with her foot connecting poorly, at a bad angle, the way she connected with most things, and it skidded across the concrete under a folding table and out of Malcolm's reach. He grabbed her instead. one hand on her arm, spinning her, putting himself behind her, with the logic of a man who has one card left and is playing it with both hands. Seo, his voice was loud over the noise from below, stretched thin and hard. Seo, stop. Tell your people to stop. The sound from below changed. Not stopped, changed. The movement going still and watchful rather than advancing, because Jaemin ran a team that communicated without being told twice. The room went tense. Kang-hyun had stopped moving. He was 8 feet away, and his eyes were on Zuri, and the expression on his face was the most stripped-down thing she'd seen from him, not the controlled professional. Not the careful man building something careful, just raw and focused and very still. He looked at her. She looked at him. And the thing she understood in that moment, with Malcolm's hand on her arm and the yellow envelope under the table, and her mother behind her with zip-tied hands, and all of it balanced on whatever happened in the next 15 seconds, was that she was not afraid. She was not afraid of Malcolm's grip, or the warehouse, or the noise from below, or the two men somewhere on the Senegas that Jaemin's team hadn't yet accounted for. She was not afraid because Kang-hyun was 8 feet away, and she knew with the specific certainty of something built over 37 days of kitchen mornings, and careful distances, and the framed drawing of a 6-year-old in a hand, held in a study that he was not going to look away. She also knew, with equal certainty, that if she waited for someone else to resolve this moment, she was going to stand here, being held indefinitely while Malcolm tried to negotiate something that wasn't negotiable. She'd spent 4 years waiting for the moment to be right. She was done waiting. Zuri said, Malcolm. He tightened his grip. Don't. Those records are already out of your reach, she said. The envelope doesn't matter anymore. Whatever my father gave to federal investigators, it's been sitting in a file for 4 years waiting for someone to push it. I pushed it this morning. Before I came here, I called the agent my father named in his notes, and I told them what I had, and I told them to move. She paused. The envelope is insurance. It's my father's version. But the federal version is already in motion. Silence. You're lying, he said. I'm not. She turned her head enough to find his face in her peripheral vision. You spent 4 years learning what I look like when I'm scared and what I look like when I'm managing you. You know the difference. Which one do I look like right now? He was quiet. She felt his grip shift, not releasing, but uncertain. The hand of a man whose math was no longer working. Walk away, she said, right now. Before this becomes something you can't come back from. There's nowhere to walk to, he said, and the composure was gone now, all of it. And underneath it was what had always been underneath it. A man who had built something on borrowed time, and had known for years that the clock was running and had not been able to stop it. There's nowhere. If what you're saying is true, give yourself up, she said. Cooperate. Whatever you know about the people above you, you have it. It's the only thing left that has any value. Use it. His hand dropped, not all at once. It released by degrees, fingers first, then the palm, and Zuri stepped forward and away from him and turned around, and Malcolm Vane was standing in the center of a warehouse room. He'd bought 4 years ago for a plan that had just finished failing, and he looked, for the first time since she'd known him, genuinely small. Not because of his size, because of what had run out. She stepped to her mother's chair and crouched and worked the zip tie off Celestine's wrists with fingers that were finally, now that it was over, not quite steady. Her mother grabbed her hands the moment they were free and held them. You good? Zuri said. I've been better, Celestine said. I've also been worse. You? Ask me tomorrow. Her mother made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else and held on. Jaemin appeared in the doorway. He assessed the room in approximately 2 seconds, communicated something to the team below with a word Zuri didn't catch, and crossed to where Malcolm was standing. Malcolm did not resist. Kang-hyun crossed the room to Zuri. He didn't say anything. He looked at her face, and then at her arm where Malcolm had grabbed her, and then at her face again. And whatever he found there made him exhale, once, slowly, like a man releasing pressure that had been building since the moment her phone rang in his study. The envelope, Zuri said. She reached under the table and retrieved it. Slightly bent at one corner from the kick, otherwise intact. She held it for a moment. Then she held it out to Kang-hyun. He looked at it. That's yours. It's evidence, she said. I need it in hands that know how to use it correctly. Jaemin's team will know who to give it to. He took it. Careful. With both hands. You called the federal investigator, he said. This morning. Yes, before we left the estate. I used the sat phone in the security office. I asked Jaemin who to call, and he gave me a name. She looked at him. I wasn't lying to Malcolm about that part. Kang-hyun looked at her for a long moment. The part you were lying about, he said. The timeline. They're moving, but not as fast as I told him. We have maybe a 24-hour head start before it becomes complicated. He absorbed this. You bluffed him with a half-truth, he said. My father was a very careful man, she said. I paid attention. Outside the room, below them, the organized sound of Jaemin's team completing what they'd come to complete. Outside the building, somewhere at the end of the block, a car engine running. The city moving around all of it the way the city moved around everything, enormous and indifferent and ongoing. Celestine stood up from the chair, rubbed her wrists, looked around the room with the expression of a woman cataloging everything for a retelling she intended to be very thorough, and said, to no one in particular, I want to go home and I want tea and I want someone to explain to me who this very large man is. Kang-hyun looked at Celestine. Celestine looked at Kang-hyun. Ma'am, he said. Celestine said in the specific tone of a mother who is conducting an evaluation and has not yet rendered a verdict. Zuri put her face in both hands for approximately 3 seconds. Then she looked up at the warehouse ceiling, cracked and dark above the temporary lighting, and breathed, and the cold that had been in her chest since that morning was finally, for the first time all day, beginning to thaw. It wasn't over, she knew that. There were conversations still to be had, investigations to navigate, the full weight of her father's records, and what they meant, and what they would set in motion. There was Malcolm and whatever came next for him, and the people above him, whose names were written in her father's hand on 12 pages, now tucked inside Kang-hyun's jacket. There was all of that still ahead. But her mother was standing upright and furious and already composing the story she was going to tell, and the yellow envelope was somewhere it could do what her father had always intended it to do. And Zuri Ellington was standing in a warehouse in East Pilsen, feeling for the first time in 4 years like the full and exact size of herself. Kang-hyun looked at her. She looked back. And he reached out and touched her face with one hand, the hand that shook briefly when emotion ran too close to the surfaces, and she felt the faintest tremor under his palm, and she turned her cheek into it and held it there. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left that the moment needed from words. The night after the warehouse, nobody slept. Celestine Ellington sat in the estate's kitchen with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that Kang-hyun had made himself silently, carefully, with the focused attention of a man who understood that making tea was something useful he could do, while everything else was outside his control, and she talked for 2 hours about Desmond. Not about the files or the money or the corporations. About the man. About the way he'd hummed while he cooked, and the specific knock he used on their bedroom door even after 30 years of marriage, and the way he'd looked at her across a room when he thought she wasn't watching, like he was checking that she was still there and finding the answer satisfactory. Zuri sat beside her mother and listened, and didn't try to manage the grief or redirect it toward something more productive. She just let it be what it was. Kang-hyun sat at the far end of the table and said nothing. But he was present, in the way he was always present, when it mattered not performing comfort, just occupying the same space, which turned out to be its own kind of steadiness. Jaemin came and went with updates delivered quietly at the doorway, never entering the kitchen during those 2 hours without being asked. His team had Malcolm in a location that was not the warehouse, and not a police precinct yet, because there were conversations that needed to happen before the official machinery took over, and those conversations required a window that Jaemin was managing. The federal agent Zuri had reached through her father's notes, a woman named Carver, whose name Desmond had written at the bottom of the letter with the instruction she's been waiting for someone to pay per trail, had confirmed by 10:15 p.m. that the digital records Desmond filed were intact, had been sitting in a federal financial crimes database for 4 years, and had stalled repeatedly at the investigative level. Because the network Malcolm served had people in the right places to slow things down without killing them entirely. The yellow envelope was what they'd been missing. Not because the handwritten records contained information the digital files didn't. They contained the same information, plus her father's interpretive notes, his understanding of what the transactions meant and who they connected to. What the paper trail provided was what digital records never quite could: the human layer, the mind of the person who had actually sat in rooms with these people and understood how the money moved because he'd been asked to help move it. Desmond Ellington had not been corrupt. He had been, in the specific way of careful people who find themselves inside something wrong, methodically building the documentation that would eventually make what was wrong undeniable. He'd died before it was used. Zuri sat in the kitchen of the Seo estate and listened to her mother talk about her father, and held the fact of that quietly. He'd known. He'd known something was wrong, and he'd known it was dangerous, and he'd done the work anyway and left it for whoever came next. Left it for her, specifically, though she hadn't known it. It in a yellow envelope with her name written on the outside in the most indirect possible way, trusting that she would eventually be the right person in the right place to know what to do with it. She'd been that person. She hadn't known she was capable of being that person until she was already doing it. Celestine stayed the night. Kang-hyun had a suite prepared without being asked, which meant Jaemin had anticipated it, which meant Jaemin had become, over the course of 38 days, the kind of person who anticipated what the people in this house needed before they needed it and quietly arranged for it. Zuri noticed this and filed it under things she'd address later. She walked her mother to the suite at midnight. At the door, Celestine stopped and turned and looked at Zuri with the specific attention of a woman who had been watching her daughter for 32 years and knew every version of her face. "That man," she said. Zuri waited. "He made your father's tea recipe," Celestine said. "Exactly. I don't know how he knew. I didn't tell him, and I know you didn't tell him." Zuri thought about the way Kang-hyun had moved in the kitchen, quietly pulling things from where they lived making no fuss about it. "He pays attention," she said. "To you," her mother said. "He was watching you while he made it. Not the tea. You." Zuri didn't say anything. "4 years you spent with a man who watched you to find the places to push," Celestine said. "This one watches you to find what you need." She touched Zuri's face once briefly, the way she'd done since Zuri was small. "I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm just telling you I see it." She went inside and closed the door. Zuri stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went to find Kang-hyun. He was in his study. The wooden box was on the desk, open. He'd taken the 6 velvet pouches out and arranged them in a line, and he was sitting in the chair behind the desk, not doing anything with them, just looking at them, the way a person looks at something they've been carrying a long time and are finally considering putting down. She knocked on the open door. He looked up. She came in and sat in the chair across the desk, the visitor's chair, the one she'd never used before, the desk between them, and looked at the 6 pouches. "Jaemin's update," she said, "on Malcolm. I read it. He's cooperating? His lawyer arrived at 11. The conversation with Carver's team is scheduled for tomorrow morning." He looked at the pouches. "What he has, the information about the people above him, is substantial. She'll work with it. Will it be enough? It'll be enough to make the right things uncomfortable for the right people." He said it with the precision of someone who understood how these systems actually worked rather than how they were supposed to work. "It won't be clean. It'll be slow. Some people at the top will negotiate their way to something that feels insufficient. That's how this kind of case goes. But it'll move." "It'll move," he confirmed. "Your father's records are the spine of it. Without the paper trail, the digital evidence was a body without bones. With it," he paused, "it holds together." Zuri looked at the velvet pouches. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He waited. "The 7th one," she said. "The empty one. When did you put it in the box?" "A beat. The day before you arrived," he said. The room was quiet. "You'd already decided," she said. "My grandmother had decided. I told myself I was honoring the arrangement." He looked at the pouches without blinking. "But I bought the box specifically because there were 6 already, and I wanted—" He stopped. "I wanted the empty space to mean something, even if it ended the same way." You wanted to believe it wouldn't, she said. He didn't answer. That was its own answer. She stood up and came around the desk, and he turned the chair slightly so they weren't at cross purposes, and she sat on the edge of the desk beside the pouches and looked at him at this closer range and said, I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it. He looked at her. I'm not staying because of the debt or the lease or because Malcolm is handled and I have nowhere else to go, she said. I'm not staying out of gratitude for the security team or the yellow envelope or because you caught me on the way down every time I fell. She looked at him steadily. I'm staying because somewhere in the last 38 days, I fell in love with a man who framed a 6-year-old's drawing and kept rings in a box, because throwing them away would mean pretending the people who wore them didn't matter. And I don't know how to unknow what I know about who you are. Kang-hyun was very still. You're not going to tell me I'm wrong, she said. You're not going to find a reason it's more complicated than that. I'm giving you one choice, which is to let this be what it is. He looked at her for a long moment. You know what I am, he said. Not the tremor. Not that specific vulnerability he'd moved past it, had stopped using it as a preemptive reason why she should leave. Something else. The broader thing. The organization. The history. The weight of what he'd built and the cost of how he'd built it. All of it. I know what I've seen, she said, which is more than most people get. It's not a small thing. No, she agreed. It's not. And I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying it's real, and I'm choosing it. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were still. She reached over and covered one of them with hers. Under her palm, the faintest tremor. The one that happened when he felt something he didn't know how to protect himself from. She felt it and didn't move her hand. Okay, he said. It was not a grand statement. It was one word, said quietly, by a man who had spent years preparing for a different outcome and was not sure yet what to do with this one. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and it was enough. The morning after the warehouse, Zuri called Camille. She stood in the garden with a coffee cup and told the whole story and listened to the extended silence on the other end. That meant Camille was processing at speed. Then Camille said, You dropped the envelope on the floor. Yes, as a signal. Yes, while being held by your ex-fiancé in a warehouse. Correct, a pause. I told you about that man years ago. You did. I said there's something wrong in his eyes. You said that, yes. And you said I was being dramatic. I was incorrect, Zuri said, another pause. Then Camille said, Tell me about the Korean crime boss. Zuri looked at the garden. At the stone path she'd taken every morning for 38 days, the one that didn't flood by the east side. At in the beds that were beginning to go toward autumn, the colors shifting and deepening toward amber and rust. At the estate around her, which had stopped looking managed sometime in the last few weeks and had started looking, in ways she couldn't entirely point to, like somewhere people actually lived. He makes my father's tea, she said, without being told how. Camille was quiet. Yeah, Camille said finally. Okay. 2 weeks after the warehouse, Malcolm Vane formally entered cooperation with federal investigators and provided testimony that named 11 individuals across 4 interconnected financial networks. The investigation had been stalled for 4 years by a combination of insufficient evidence and well-placed obstruction. With Desmond Ellington's records, Carver's team had what they needed to move. It was not fast. Nothing about federal financial investigations was fast, and Carver told Zuri this directly during the meeting at the estate that happened on a cold Thursday in late October, told her that the people who had genuinely killed her father, because the investigation confirmed within 10 days that Desmond Ellington's cardiac event had been induced, were not going to see consequences next week or next month. The case would take time. Some people would negotiate. Some would disappear before they could be reached. But it would move. The spine would hold. Zuri sat across from Carver at the estate's dining table with Kang-hyun beside her and Jaemin near the door, and she listened to all of it and said, At the end he knew, didn't he? My father. He knew they'd come for him. Carver looked at her. Based on what he documented in the weeks before his death, yes. He knew the risk, and he did it anyway. He did it anyway. Zuri put both hands flat on the table and held the surface of it. Okay, she said. Then let's make sure it goes somewhere. The conversation with Seolmi was not something Zuri sought out. It found her, the way unfinished things tend to, on a gray Tuesday when Seolmi called and asked, in a voice stripped of its characteristic precision, if Zuri had a few minutes. They met at the coffee shop in Andersonville, the same one whose bag had appeared on the estate's kitchen counter on day 11. Seolmi arrived first. She was already at the table when Zuri walked in, and she looked different, not diminished exactly, but redistributed. Like something she'd been holding upright for a long time had finally been set down, and she was still figuring out what her posture felt like without it. "I heard what happened," Seolmi said. "I heard about Vane and the files and your mother." She paused. "I wanted to say he used me. He asked questions through someone I trusted, and I answered because I thought they were background checks. For Kang-hyun's safety." "I didn't know," Zuri said. "I would never have that too." Seolmi looked at her hands. "I made a decision years ago that cost him something significant. I've lived with that. But this being used against him again, even indirectly." She stopped. "I wanted you to know I had no part in it willingly." "I believe you," Zuri said. And then, because it was true, and because some things needed to be said out loud to be real, what you did to him was wrong. Sharing what he told you in confidence, that was a real injury, and it had real consequences. And I think you know that. Seolmi didn't flinch. "Yes. And I'm not the one who gets to forgive you for it. That's between you and him." "Has he—" "That's also between you and him," Zuri said. "He's not a man who carries hate. I don't think it's in his architecture." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "What I can tell you is that he's okay. He's better than okay." Something moved in Seolmi's face that was complicated and genuine. "Good," she said, and then, quietly, the last of the performance completely gone. "I'm glad it's you." Zuri looked at her. "You came back," Seolmi said. "I told you there was something he needed to tell you, and I thought you'd flinch. And you walked into the kitchen, and you held on." She looked at Zuri steadily across the small table. "He needed someone who would hold on." Zuri sat with that. "He's not the only one," she said eventually. Hwaran Seo held a small dinner on the 45th day of the original 90-day arrangement, which was also the day Kang-hyun formally told her the 90 days were functionally over because the arrangement had become something else, and she might as well know. Hwaran's response was to look at him for a long moment over her tea and say, in Korean, something that Jae-min later translated for Zuri as, "I told you. You never listen to me, and I'm always right." The dinner was 4 people: Hwaran, Kang-hyun, Zuri, and Celestine, who had driven herself from Bridgeport in the car Kang had arranged for her the morning after the warehouse, and had been coming to dinner at the estate approximately twice a week since, which meant she and Hwaran had begun developing a relationship that Zuri found slightly alarming in its intensity and warmth. 2 women in their 70s who had both survived enormous losses and raised difficult, beloved children, and arrived at old age with the specific confidence of people who no longer felt the need to be uncertain about things they understood. They talked about everything except what had happened. That was intentional, Zuri thought. Not avoidance. Rest. A meal that existed on its own terms, without serving anything except the pleasure of being at a table together. Hwaran told a story about her late husband that made Celestine laugh hard enough that she had to put her fork down. Celestine told a story about Desmond that made Hwaran reach across the table and cover Celestine's hand with both of hers and hold it for a moment without saying anything, which was not something Hwaran did easily and which meant something precise. Zuri looked at Kang-hyun across the table. He was watching his grandmother's hand over Celestine's, and his expression was the open, unguarded version she'd only started seeing in the last 2 weeks, the one that wasn't performing control, wasn't bracing, wasn't waiting for the thing he was afraid of. He felt her looking and found her eyes. She didn't look away. He didn't either. Under the table, his hand found hers and held it, and they sat like that through the rest of dinner, while their grandmothers talked about their grandfathers, and the estate was warm and loud in a way it had apparently never quite been before, and Zuri felt the truth of it settle in her chest, like something that had been looking for its place and finally found it. 48 days after arriving at the estate, 11 days after the original arrangement was supposed to have ended, Zuri found the passport and the plane ticket and the envelope of money on her nightstand. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at them. The plane ticket was to anywhere literally, an open-ended travel voucher rather than a specific destination, which meant he'd thought about it enough to not presume to choose for her. The envelope had enough in it to start over without pressure. And her passport, she picked it up, held it, turned it in her hands. Then she put it down, put the plane ticket down, put the money down, and stood up and went to find Kang-hyun. He was in the marble foyer, standing in it like he'd been there a while, like he'd arranged the morning to find her here specifically. He was in a dark suit because he had meetings, later actual business meetings, for the legitimate construction operation, a contractor dispute that needed his presence. Completely ordinary professional things, and he looked exactly like the man she'd grabbed by the jacket on day one. Except that she now knew the library behind his eyes, and the kitchen at 6 in the morning, and the 7 velvet pouches and the drawing Sua made, and every careful thing in between. She walked up to him and stopped. "You ended the arrangement," she said. "Yes, you gave me a way out. I gave you a choice," he said. "That's different." She looked at him. "You do this every time. You prepare for them to leave, and then you make it easier for them to go. I didn't want you to stay out of obligation, I know." She crossed her arms. "I know exactly why you did it, and it was a kind thing to do, and I am telling you right now that if you ever do it again, I will be significantly annoyed." Something moved in his expression. "6 women," she said. "Zuri, I know about 6 women. I know what that number means to you. I know what you've decided it proves about you, which is nothing. Because 6 people making 6 individual choices proves exactly 6 things, and none of them is that something is fundamentally wrong with you." She looked at him steadily. "I am the 7th, and I'm making my choice. Not because you caught me when I fell, or because your people found my mother, or because this estate has a library with a window I got open with a butter knife." She paused. "Well, partly because of the library." He almost smiled. "I'm staying because I choose you," she said. Specifically, with full information, knowing the whole thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. The box was small and dark, and she had never seen it before, which meant it was not one of the 6. It was new, bought recently. She could tell by the way he held it, with the specific care of something that had not yet been returned or replaced or put away. He went down on one knee. Zuri's hands came to her mouth. He opened the box. Inside was a ring she had not seen before, not in the study, not in the box with the velvet pouches. A ring chosen for her specifically, she understood, not retrieved from any previous iteration. Simple and precise, and the exact kind of she would have chosen herself, which meant he'd paid attention in a way she hadn't known he was paying. He looked at her from the floor. "Zuri Ellington," he said. "No arrangement, no obligation, no time limit, and no contingency." She was depths green wood splitting. She was already nodding before he finished, and she stepped forward to close the distance, and her heel caught the edge of the same rug she'd caught on day one, and she lurched forward and grabbed the nearest thing, which was his shoulder. And the box flew out of his hand and skidded across the marble and came to rest against the base of the foyer cabinet. The marble foyer went silent. From the hallway, Jaemin's voice, "I have it." His shoe had stopped the box. Hwaran's voice, from somewhere further in, a sound that was distinctly laughter. Full, unguarded, the laugh of an old woman who had engineered this entire situation and was finding it deeply satisfying. Kang-hyun was looking at the box, then at Zuri, then at the rug that had now defeated her twice. His expression was doing something. She recognized the specific struggle of a man trying not to laugh in a moment that was also genuinely meaningful. He lost. He laughed. Quietly at first, and then fully, head dropping, shoulders moving, his whole contained self releasing in a way that still surprised her every time she heard it. Zuri started laughing too. Jaemin crossed the foyer, retrieved the box, and presented it to Kang-hyun with the formal expression of a man pretending he had witnessed nothing unusual. Kang-hyun took it, composed himself by degrees. He was still on one knee. He looked up at her. She was still slightly off balance from the rug. He reached up and steadied her first. Then he opened the box again. Yes, she said, before he could start the question over. I didn't finish. Yes, she said again. The answer is yes. It was yes before you got the box out. It was probably yes sometime around day 11. Ask me anything you want, and the answer is yes. He looked at her. The laugh was gone now. What was on his face was quieter than that and more permanent, something that had been arriving slowly for 48 days and had now arrived completely, without reservation, without the layer of bracing that had been there every time before. He took the ring from the box and held out his hand. She put hers in it. His hands were still, she noticed. She didn't say anything about it. The months that followed were not simple. Malcolm Vane's cooperation produced an indictment by December, and 3 of the 11 names he'd provided were arrested before January. The others moved and negotiated, and in 2 cases disappeared into the bureaucratic fog of international financial structures. Carver called Zuri every few weeks with updates that were always complicated and rarely fully satisfying, because the truth of cases like this was that justice moved at the speed of institutions, and institutions moved slowly. 2 people who had direct knowledge of what happened to Desmond Ellington were indicted. Whether that ever became a conviction was a question that would take years to answer. Zuri made a decision about this. She could spend years waiting for a resolution and let the waiting be the center of everything, or she could let her father's work be what it was, complete, careful, consequential, and let the legal system do with it what it could, and live her life in the meantime. She chose the second one. It was not a permanent choice made once. It was a choice she made every few weeks when Carver called, and some days it was easier than others. And on the hard days, she sat in the library, with the window she'd opened with a butter knife, and read until the noise inside her head became manageable. Sometimes Kang-hyun came and sat in the other chair without asking if she wanted company. She always wanted company. She never had to say so. The gala was in February. A foundation event, a different one from the autumn charity dinner, this one for a literacy organization on the southern side, that Zuri had been introduced to through her own previous work in nonprofit management. Kang-hyun had funded the foundation's new program space. The executive director had asked them both to attend. Zuri wore a fitted gown in deep emerald green. She'd bought it without consulting anyone, without a second voice suggesting something more forgiving or a different color or a different silhouette, and she'd put it on the night of the event and looked at herself in the mirror for approximately 30 seconds and decided she looked exactly like herself, which was the thing she was going for. The gala was crowded in the pleasant way of events that are well-organized movement and noise and the particular warmth of a room full of people who are there because they want to be, rather than because they feel obligated. Kang-hyun introduced her to the foundation's director as my fiancé, Zuri Ellington, with no footnote and no qualifier, and then stayed close for the first 30 minutes, until it was clear she knew where she was and who was worth talking to, and then gave her the room the way she'd started, to understand he always would available, but not adjacent present, but not managing. She was talking to a program coordinator about the Southside literacy rates when she noticed Seol Mai across the room. They made eye contact. Seol Mi nodded. Zuri nodded back. It was not warmth exactly. It was acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement of 2 women who had both loved the same man in different ways at different times and had arrived, through very different paths, at a complicated peace with that. No conversation needed. Zuri turned back to the program coordinator and picked up the thread of what they'd been discussing. Later, near the end of the evening, Kang-hyun found her and stood beside her while the foundation's director gave a brief address from the front of the room. The director mentioned the funding and mentioned Kang-hyun's name, and mentioned in passing the organization's new partnerships with community literacy advocates. At a table near the front, a woman Zuri didn't recognize leaned toward her companion and said something. They both glanced toward Kang-hyun with the specific expression of people who know a name and are attaching it to a face for the first time. Kang-hyun felt it. She knew he felt it because she'd learned to read the small shift in his posture when he registered being observed. She reached over and took his hand, not a gesture of reassurance. Just his hand taken, because she wanted to hold it. He looked at her. She looked at the front of the room. His hand settled around hers and didn't move. They were married in the Seo estate's garden in early October. The morning of the wedding, Kang-hyun was in the kitchen at 5:45, and Zuri came downstairs and found him there. And they stood on opposite sides of the aisle the way they'd stood for 56 mornings before anything else had been said, decided, and drank coffee in the early quiet of the house. Today, he said. Today, she said. Are you? Yes, she said. Don't ask me if I'm sure. I've been sure since day 11. He looked at his coffee. The chocolate croissant, he said. Yes, I thought that was overly obvious. It was completely obvious, she said. It was also the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me at that point in my life, which is its own thing to sit with. He looked at her. I'm going to keep doing things like that, he said. I'm counting on it, she said. They finished their coffee. The estate filled up slowly after that, Celestine arriving with Aunt Renee in tow, Jamin's wife bringing Sua, who had made another drawing specifically for the occasion, Waran moving through the preparations with the efficient satisfaction of a woman watching something she arranged arrive at its correct conclusion. Zuri got ready in the East Suite, the room that had been hers from day one, with the key no one else had. She stood in front of the mirror in her wedding dress, fitted, ivory, the kind of dress that did not make apologies for the body it contained, and looked at herself for a long time. She thought about the woman who had sat in a gas station parking lot eating a honey bun and almost turning around. She thought about the first dinner and the library and the photographs in the white envelope and the warehouse and her father's handwriting on 12 pages and the tremor under her palm in the study and the ring skidding across marble and her mother. Laughing and Kang-hyun's laugh, the real one, the one that still surprised her every time. She picked up her bouquet. She opened the door. The garden path to the aisle was lined with the estate's late-season flowers, amber and rust and deep gold, the colors of October making the space look warmer than any plantain decoration could manage. Kang-hyun stood at the end of the aisle. She saw him from the start of the path. He saw her. Even at distance, she could see the thing in his face, the thing she'd been watching arrive for 56 days and beyond. He looked like a man who had decided to believe something and was discovering that the decision had been correct. She began walking toward him. One step, the gravel path solid under her heel. Another step. Her gown shifted over the ground, and her bouquet was slightly asymmetrical because she'd been gripping it too tightly, and Celestine somewhere to her left made a sound that was not quite composed. And the morning was cold enough to see breath and warm enough in the sun to not mind, and the path was exactly long enough for her to know what she was walking toward. Her heel caught the hem, not badly. A small snag, the kind that threatened and then released, and she recovered without going down, but she felt the lurch, and she laughed because she couldn't help it, which was the truest thing about her. Had always been the truest thing, that she laughed when she caught herself falling. At the end of the aisle, Kang-hyun moved. He didn't wait for her to come the rest of the way. He walked toward her halfway down the path, closing in front of her, closing the distance himself with the same focused simplicity with which he did everything that actually mattered. He offered his hand. She took it. They walked the rest of the way together. Months after the wedding, the estate had become impossible to mistake for what it had been when Zuri arrived. Books lived on every surface. Her shoes appeared under chairs and beside doors with the reliable frequency of things that belonged somewhere, without being told where. Coffee cups were discovered in the library, in the garden, twice on the windowsill of the East Suite because she'd been reading in bed and set it down and walked away. 3 pieces of furniture that had repeatedly absorbed the impact of her particular gravitational relationship with the world had been retired to storage. Jamin kept a private list. Objects recovered. Cups returned from increasingly creative locations. Unscheduled encounters between Zuri's elbow and things that had previously considered themselves stable. He did not show the list to anyone but Sua, who found it hilarious and had begun contributing her own observations, which she communicated in a combination of Korean and drawings. Haran took full credit for the marriage in every conversation. Nobody argued with her. Celestine came to dinner on Thursdays. She and Hwaran had begun watching a Korean drama together on a tablet at the kitchen table after dinner, which neither of them discussed with the younger generation, though Jaemin had witnessed it twice and managed each time to leave without being seen. Kang-hyun stopped keeping the wooden box on the desk. He didn't throw it away. It was in the study still, on a shelf, and the 6 velvet pouches were still in it because they were real, and they had happened, and pretending otherwise had never been how he dealt with things. But it was on the shelf instead of the desk, which was a different relationship with the same facts, the difference between carrying something and having it near. The 7th pouch was in Zuri's jewelry box, her choice not his. She'd asked for it one evening, explained without drama that she wanted it somewhere, that meant it was part of the thing they'd built, rather than part of the thing that came before it, and he'd given it to her without asking questions. Because he was a man who had learned to trust what she decided with full information. A Sunday morning in the following spring, Zuri sat in the library with the window, open the one she'd unstuck with a butter knife. Still the same window. A sound letting in the smell of the garden and the sound of whatever Jaemin's security team did on Sunday mornings when they thought nobody was watching and read until the words started moving, the way they did when she'd been reading too long. She heard the door. Kang-hyun came in with 2 cups and set one on the table beside her and took the other chair, the one she'd started thinking of as his chair, the one that had been empty when she arrived and was now shaped by the specific way he sat in it and had been for months. She looked at him. He looked at the window. The garden outside was coming into itself, the spring version, new and not yet settled, the kind of beauty that feels tentative before it commits. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He considered the question. "Nothing specific," he said. "Just this." She understood what he meant. The room, the morning, the cups, the window she'd forced open. All of it together, adding up to the thing she'd been making by being here, which was not something either of them had planned or arranged, but was real in the way only unplanned things fully were. She went back to her book. He drank his coffee. The garden did what it was doing outside the window, and the estate was quiet in the way of places that are full rather than empty, and whatever had been missing from those rooms for years was missing no longer. It had arrived in a yellow sweater on a Tuesday in September, catching her heel on a marble foyer rug, grabbing the nearest thing for balance, staying for the rest.